Good morning. I'm very pleased to be here. My name is Judy Giesberg, and I hope you can all hear me. Can everybody hear me okay? Great. I'm here to tell you a little bit about the book that I've just written and the research that went into it, and also to, give you a little bit more of the background information behind an archive that I've been working on and that I'm very pleased to know some of the descendants have found of use. So with that, I will begin. Thank you and good morning. I wish to inquire for my brother and sister. My brother's names are Roberta Taylor, Noble Taylor, and William Taylor, and my sister's name is Charlotte Taylor. Edward Taylor was in his 50s when he wrote to the papers in search of his parents. He wrote from Iberville Parish, Louisiana. He had last seen them in Maryland 40 years ago. Edward was just 11 when he was sold away from his sister and three brothers and sent to Louisiana. He'd lived a lifetime since then. He enlisted in the U.S. Army during the Civil War, and afterwards he became a blacksmith. Taylor and his wife had 6 children, owned a plot of land where they were raising them. Yet the memories he had of the family he'd left behind in Maryland were still vivid. We were all separated long before the war, he said. But really, as some of you in the Zoom know, the family was separated repeatedly. First, Taylor lost his mother, his father, Moses, when his mother and siblings were sold by Jesuit priests to raise money to save the college we know today as Georgetown, and the separating continued. Edward lost his mother next and his siblings when he was put on a slave ship bound for New Orleans. There are actually 2 advertisements in the archive about which I was just mentioning. When he was put on that ship and sailed to New Orleans, Edward found himself far away from the places he knew and the people who he loved. And now, 40 years later, from that far away place, he determined to find them. Edward Taylor's story is not one of the 10 that I tell in the book, and I can certainly talk about the choices I made in the book later when we have a chance for a Q&A. But for now, I'll just say that I had to make a lot of hard choices about the stories that stayed in the book and those that didn't. And I chose to focus on some of the ones that we had not heard about. But I would like to talk about this story because it illustrates this morning, because it illustrates one of the most important lessons that I learned as I wrote that book. And that is that millions of enslaved Americans who became free during the Civil War had survived unspeakable violence, both physical and emotional, had been sold from their mothers or had been sold from them, had been told to not to expect to survive a forced march. In many of their cases, in Edward's case, it was aboard a ship. They were marched, in many cases, to places like Texas, Georgia, Mississippi, Louisiana, and they were told to never expect to see their loved ones again. Yet they did survive, and they continued to hope, and they loved. Edward Taylor's stories of courage. It jumps off the page as you read his ad. Courage was his family's inheritance. What else besides courage and love would have driven Moses and Eliza to escape bondage when they did? Young Edward showed courage when he enlisted to fight in the U.S. Army, and it was courage, theirs and his, that helped Edward survive those long years without them. This book that I've just written is about people like Edward. And let me tell you a little bit more about some of the people that I talk about in the book. When the Civil War was over, as many of you know, of course, the institution of slavery had finally come to an end. 4 million Americans walked forward into freedom. Many were displaced from their homes, and even where they were not, they had immediate pressing needs. They needed food, shelter, medical care, work, and they wanted desperately to find the family members who they'd been sold away from. Over the 40 years of America's domestic slave trade, roughly 1820 to 1860, at least 1 million people were taken from their loved ones in places like Virginia, Maryland, North Carolina, and other East Coast slave states, and were sold to slave marketplaces in New Orleans and Galveston. They were wives, they were husbands, brothers, sisters, and children. Each one of them changed hands repeatedly, moving between buyers and sellers in what was a dizzying series of transactions until they landed in the cotton fields of Mississippi Valley. They didn't expect to survive. And they were told they would never see their loved ones again. But they didn't listen, and they never gave up hope that they'd see their families again. They held on to the details about their loved ones and to the names of the people who had bought and sold them. They recalled vividly the time and place where they had last seen them. And when the war was over and they were finally free, they walked into the offices of Black newspapers that were opening up throughout the post-war South to tell their stories. They placed advertisements calling out to their loved ones, letting them know that they still lived, and hoping to hear back that their families did too. The one on this slide is Rachel Cotton's family story. Cotton wasn't always her name when she had been Rachel Marshall. People before that, but perhaps before that, she had been called Weaver, like her mother, Maria Weaver. The first wave of advertisements began in 1865, the last year of the war, and they continued for decades. Indeed, as late as 1920s, freed people were still placing ads in the papers, seeking loved ones who they had not seen in decades. The ads give shape to a shared experience of freedom generation that I talk about in my book. Nearly every one of the generation of Americans who became free during the war had lost someone in the slave trade, or they had been lost to them. The ads give us tantalizing brief snapshots of epic searches for lost daughters, sons, mothers, wives, husbands, and kin. And they offer testament to the communities freed people built in the post-war South. The schools where they learned to read and write, to the papers with their own advertisements. The churches where every Sunday Black pastors read aloud ads from people like them, perhaps even some that they knew from the old place, ads from people who might be looking for them. You can explore these advertisements at the website informationwanted.org, which is a free and open access archive that my students and I have been building since about 2017, with support from a variety of different sources, including the National Archives, which has since ceased to support projects like this. We have about 5,000 ads in the collection now. Each one of these is a family story told, in many cases, nowhere else. Informationwanted.org serves as this resource for Black genealogists who trace their ancestry to freedom generation. As of this February, we had registered about 18 million hits to the website by about 400,000 unique users. And we'll keep on chugging along, and the site will remain up as long as I have a job at Villanova University that allows me to keep the website running. If you have your phone out and you haven't been to the website, you can actually hold it up and get to that QR code, and that will open you right up to the informationwanted.org website, where you too can begin to search the website for people who you might know or you might be looking for. Now, that number is actually out of date now, so I'll pass past that. We've got more ads. We're closing in on 5,000 now. Now, I've talked about these ads for a few minutes. I think it's important for you to meet a couple people in the ads, and if this works, you'll be able to hear. Oops, nope, that did not work the way I wanted it to work. Hold on, let me get back here. Are we looking at my slide again? All right. That's not gonna work. Mm, sorry, I'm gonna try to turn that off now so it doesn't keep playing. Pardon me. Sometimes the Zoom doesn't do what you want it to do. So you just heard the advertisement of Polly McRae read by a professional actor. We have several of these advertisements read by professional actors, and the recordings of them on the website. So you can actually hear what the advertisements would have sounded like when they were communicated in Black churches. I'll see if this one works without all of that flipping back and forth.
Can't hear it.
Can you not hear it?
No audio.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, then I will just leave the ad up there for one moment. Can you hear me? Oh. Can you hear me?
I don't think so.
It's Judy, we can hear you. There's someone who has left their mic on. Please turn it
Okay,
on.
okay. Okay, you can hear me now.
We can hear, excuse me, this is Rochelle. We can hear Judy talk, but we can't hear the recording. And Judy, what you have to do when you share the screen, you're sharing the screen now, you have to enable, enable your audio on the screen.
Okay, let me see. Share computer sound. How about that?
Shannon, can you help her with that? Because we did this last night. I forget what it says.
You may need to stop sharing momentarily and then reshare, but select before you click the final.
Okay, let me try one more time. Apologies, I thought that
audio is on.
So let me try that. Can you hear that?
No, we
Did
cannot.
you hear that recording? Okay, I apologize. So I will just say that there are a number of different advertisements that actually are accompanied now by voice actors who read them out loud, which is really the way that the advertisements were intended to be shared. in these churches. And as you look at the ad and as you listen to the names in them, this is Henry Anderson's ad. He's writing from a place called Mineola, Texas. It strikes you how many details each one of these ads has, a lot of names and a lot of places, but they're also all full of emotions. The last two advertisements that I showed you are really full of emotions. You can hear it in Polly McRae's advertisement, and you can hear it in Henry Anderson's as well. You must also, as you read the advertisements, and if you go to the site and listen to them read, about how hard it would have been to find somebody with all of these details in these advertisements, how difficult that search must have been. And that's really what I talk about in the book. The road that people traveled to reunite with their family members was littered with obstacles. As you know, much of the infrastructure of the post-war South had been destroyed. For instance, and although slavery, of course, was now outlawed, former slaveholders sought desperately to hold on to the prerogatives of slavery. It's likely that few people, like Polly or Henry, found their people. Yet even so, some did. In fact, from the tiny town of the East Texas town of Mineola, Texas, that you can see there on the map, Henry Anderson, whose ad I just projected, who you can hear read on the website, managed to find the family he'd been sold away from in Maryland. In the book, you'll meet others who did as well. You'll meet in the book Hagar Outlaw of Raleigh, North Carolina, for instance, and Emmeline Skipworth, originally from Kentucky, but lately from Battle Creek, Michigan, all of whom found people through the use of advertisements such as the ones in the archive. And you'll also meet in the book people who did not find their loved ones. Not all of the stories end happily. Now more than ever, I think it's really important to be honest about this history, to tell a story that hews closely to the facts. Slavery, of course, ended in 1865, but the people who had survived the institution worked for the rest of their lives to put their families back together again. And indeed, their descendants continue to do that work today. The family separation that they had suffered was not just one moment in their lives, it shaped all of the other moments that came after. And of course, the trauma of being abruptly taken from a parent can stay with a child for the rest of their lives. It can affect their development. It can make it difficult for them to hold on to memories or make new ones. Yet the story of what came after slavery has largely missed these points. And we have not yet heard from the institution's survivors, people like Edward, who tried to find their families. It's not an accident of history that explains why the story of slavery's lost families has not been told. It resulted from a massive cover-up operation, a campaign of lies about what slavery was and what it had done to those who had managed to survive it. That campaign was called the Lost Cause. It was launched by those like the slaveholders who bought Edward, his siblings, promised not to separate a child from his family, sold Edward away from them. Men and women who, after losing the war, they fought for the right to sell people like Edward, denied that they had ever done so. Black people did not love as deeply as did white people, they said. A mother like Eliza Taylor did not feel the pain of losing Edward as would a white one, they said. And then soon whites in the North also subscribed to that same lie. White people from New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, who had fought to end slavery, but who had since grown weary or perhaps wary of the work required to secure free people the rights of citizenship. Then they too began to talk about slavery as if it had not really been that bad. Then they too began that slaveholders hadn't sold children away from their mothers. The separation of families had been rare, and when it had happened, people, of course, found each other again. White newspapers ran stories about formerly enslaved people finding one another, again, reuniting, living happily ever after. Here in the Butler Weekly Times, In 1884, for instance, a married couple named Levi and Aggie, ages 70 and 60 respectively, find one another again after a separation of 40 years. They return in part to the days of their youth, and their love is young again, the story reads. Everybody in the neighborhood has heard the sad story, and they are recipients of many kindnesses. And then in 1903, here's another example. Nashville's Tennessean ran this article, which I know you can't read, but I'll give you the gist of it. Visiting relatives in Shelbyville, Mary Burt was surprised to meet her husband of decades before. Quote, her one-time husband, whom she thought was long since dead, read the account. The two remarried, an occasion that the paper described as, quote, somewhat romantic. These stories helped to spread the lost cause lies. According to white papers, aging freed people were always running into one another, reuniting, remarrying, living happily ever after. Freedom Generation told a different story in the Black newspapers. There, they placed ads like Edward Taylor's, announcing ongoing searches for mothers, fathers, children, and siblings. Their ads told the truth that decades after emancipation, freed people continued to work to take back what was theirs. And this is super important for not people in this Zoom, but other people who read this book to understand, is that there was no federal agency dedicated to reuniting families. So freed people recruited allies among Freedmen's Bureau agents, United States Colored Troops soldiers, and Black pastors who read the ads aloud to their congregations. Their ads were full of stories of resistance, resilience, and courage. Each ad held clues that the author hoped would bring loved ones back to them. And each was evidence of the love freed people felt for one another. They refused to give up their hope that they would find each other again. Here's a couple of examples of some of that resistance and resilience that I talked about. Here's Frances Parker describing separation that, of course, occurred when an enslaved person self-emancipated. Here, she describes an escape on the Underground Railroad that led to a separation. This sounds familiar, I'm sure, to some of you in the Zoom. Clarissa Reed here describes being sold away from her enslaver after she cut off 2 of the fingers on his right hand. There's a lot more going on behind this ad that should be unpacked by somebody. And then there are other ways where people express this resistance and resilience. For instance, Catherine Mason's advertisement you're looking at here, which puts the terms of ownership in quotation marks, right, as if to suggest that anybody could claim to own another person's child. Catherine Mason puts those terms in her of ownership in quotation marks. The boy was rather the property of Thomas Pointer. Henry and Virginia Thompson do the same thing here in this advertisement when they're looking for Charlotte, and then they say that he was once owned by a Captain Briscoe. Again, a way for these advertisements to both search for people and also express resistance to the idea that anybody had the right to own anybody else. And then one more, using that same kind of terms of resistance. For the last few weeks, I've been traveling the country talking about this book, and people often ask about the stories that didn't get included and those that were the hardest to tell. I started with Edwards, and as I mentioned to you, Edwards is not in this book. And also because Edward's stories, like a lot of other stories in the book, are stories of children who were separated from their parents, and those are the hardest to tell. I'd like to tell you just one more. This is from the beginning of chapter 4. It's a story about Henry Tibbs, whose advertisement is up here posted on your screen. This is a story of a young man who was separated from his mother when he was a small child. Like Edward, he lives, endures the separation, and joins the United States Colored Troops, fights to end the institution of slavery, and then in his 50s goes looking for her. And as you can see in the advertisement, he doesn't have a lot of information about his mother. He does remember the moment when they were separated, when his mother came to the slave jail where he was being held and tried to give him courage and tried to express her love to him. He was crying, and his mother brought him cake and candy. And this is a man in his late 50s who's remembering this moment, and how his mother's appearance at that jail and her expression of love to him really steeled himself for all of the things that he would endure afterward. And he held on to that story. So I hope you'll take a look at the book and read more about Henry in the fuller story about Henry and his search for his mother. I wasn't the first historian to research these advertisements, and I won't be the last. I know this because I've seen, as I've talked about the book, people motivated to look into these stories. And also, as when we started the archive, people wanted to know how these searches ended. And that's why I decided to write this book. I decided to see if I could find 10 people and search 10 people and find out how their stories ended. And I know now that other people are doing the same thing, not only with their own family members, but just with other people in the archive. In the book, I tried to estimate how many of these stories we know ended with reunions. It's a really difficult number to come up with. We have about 100 ads in the collection that announce a reunion. If that number is right, then we're talking about 2% of searches ended successfully. That's likely not an accurate number. It's what we've got to work with in the archive. And I'm likely wrong. In fact, I hope I am wrong. In fact, we're still finding the ends of these stories. Just a few weeks ago, one more story in this archive of 5,000 got a happy ending. You're looking here at an ad placed in 1881. About 4 or 5 years ago, we found this ad and we posted it to the website. And it's Isaac Allen looking for his brothers, both Rufus and James. The last time he saw Rufus was leaving with Sherman's army. Isaac lost his brother James when James's enslaver took him from Tennessee to Georgia. Since then, Isaac heard through the grapevine telegraph that James went west. When we posted this ad, we knew nothing further about these brothers, but really just a few weeks ago, a librarian in Massachusetts found a follow-up ad that indicates that the two brothers found each other again. So we know the work is ongoing. I hope that what you've heard today will encourage you to read the book and learn more about some of the stories that I tell in it. Thank you all very much.
Thank you ever so much for a very rousing presentation. It was truly amazing, and we look forward to your answers to the audience's questions later on in the day. Thank you once again. And we do have our next speaker, Dr. Jessica Dorman of the Historic New Orleans Collection. Let's get a virtual round of applause for Dr. Dorman.
Hello, everyone. Let me start my screen sharing. All right. Please let me know if you can see what is on the screen.
Can, thank you ever so much. Yes.
All right. I'm gonna try to make it full screen there. And if at any point any technical difficulties come up, somebody scream and we'll we'll try to fix them. It's an honor to be with you all this morning. My name is Jessica Dorman, and I'm the Director of Publications at the Historic New Orleans Collection. Over the course of my talk, I'm going to introduce you to some of our institutional resources, but more broadly, following up on the wonderful presentation that we just heard, I'll speak more broadly to a movement that has been built on the curiosity, the courage, the dedication of untold number of people who have dedicated themselves over the centuries to preserving historical memory. I'm going to begin by saying a few words about the museum where I work. I'll describe an exhibition that we mounted a decade ago that galvanized so many of our staff. The database Lost Friends that emerged from this exhibition. And I'm going to tell stories about a couple of the rather unexpected artistic products that emerged from the database and leave you with some of our hopes for future impacts. And so the Historic New Orleans Collection. I've worked here for 20 years now, and I'm going to be the first to admit that our name is a mouthful. Even my parents can't always remember the name of the Historic New Orleans Collection, but what you need to know is that we are a museum, a research center, and a publisher located in the heart of the French Quarter of New Orleans. You are looking here at our flagship location, which is right on Royal Street near the big courthouse. Our programming and our publications look broadly at the art, the literature, the music, the dance, the politics, the landscape of Louisiana and the Gulf South. It is our mission to be stewards of this history and culture and to share it with the widest possible audience that we can. At the moment, we have exhibitions up about the flora and fauna of Louisiana's threatened coastline. We have a show about the Vietnamese community that has grown across the Gulf South in the 50 years since the fall of Saigon. And you can see up in the upper left of your screen our most recent exhibition. It's called The Trail They Blazed. And it's about the civil rights movement, the pioneers of the 50s and 60s in New Orleans. It's built on oral history interviews with many of the activists who did the good work. And we were honored that several of them joined us just 2 nights ago for the opening reception of this show. Right around the corner from our main exhibition center is this rather imposing facade that you see here. This is our Williams Research Center. It used to be a police station. Since the mid-90s, it has been part of our museum complex. There is additional exhibition space. We have programming space. And on the second floor, we have a reading room. And in that room, we welcome visitors, researchers of all ages, school groups, independent scholars, people coming in off the street, professors, playwrights, novelists, documentary filmmakers, people who want to build what they're working on with authentic historical documents, people who connect their family stories with the broader threads of history that run through the Gulf South and connect us all. Now, we love to welcome in-person visitors, but that our mission calls for us to connect with as many people as we can worldwide. And that's why, in addition to welcoming people to our exhibitions, to our reading room, we encourage everyone to reach us through our website, hnoc.org. And this is our portal to so many of the online resources that we make available. Today, we're going to be talking about Lost Friends. And Lost Friends is one of many featured collections, research pathfinders, databases that we make available for online engagement. We have others dedicated to the works of Tennessee Williams, who actually, when he first moved to New Orleans, lived in one of our museum buildings. We weren't a museum yet. To the decorative arts of the Gulf South. We have a cemetery survey. We have something called the Vieux Carré survey, which tracks the property records of every block in the French Quarter. And all of these, again, are available through hnoc.org. So many entry points for engagement. Any collection of data, any collection of artifacts is the work of a collection of people. And so before I go any further this morning, I really need to thank the many colleagues who have helped to build our Lost Friends collection. Just for starters, on the screen here, I want to thank Erin Greenwald, and I'm going clockwise from the left. Erin is the curator of the exhibition that got this all started. Jari Anura is our family historian. Jari is an expert in African-American genealogy. Next to him, Melissa Carrier is a staff photographer, and Melissa has photographed thousands and thousands of artifacts and then digitized them to make them available to researchers. Kent Winowski is our head of technical services, and working with his team, including the bottom corner, Candy Ellison, and next to her, Josh McKendall. They're our website designer and developer, and they've helped to build so many of our databases. And finally, in the yellow scarf, Heather Green. Heather is our head of reader services, and that just means that she's going to be the first point for any research query that comes in, whether on foot, by phone, or by email. So again, my gratitude to my colleagues and to the many other staff and volunteers who have made all of this possible to serve researchers far and wide. Okay, bear with me as I go back in time a little bit and talk about Purchased Lives. Purchased Lives, New Orleans and the Domestic Slave Trade was an exhibition that we put on in 2015. It ran at our Williams Research Center from March to July of that year. The dates that bookend the narrative: 1808 is the abolition in the United States of the international slave trade, 1865, the end of the Civil War. And so with the abolition of the international trade, coupled with the ongoing demand for labor in the South, this triggers the forced migration of some 1 million people from the upper South to the lower South. And New Orleans becomes, over the subsequent decades, the largest slave market in America. Our exhibition included artifacts from our own museum holdings, but it wouldn't have been possible without loans from private lenders and from many other public institutions across the South and across the country. What we were trying to do with this exhibition was to make visible for modern audiences sites that would have pervaded the lives of individuals in New Orleans every day through this period. There was no one single slave market in the city of New Orleans, but the print shown here from the 1840s shows a public sale in the Grand Rotunda of what is now the Omni Royal Orleans Hotel. Those of you who've been in New Orleans probably are aware of this hotel. It's right next door to our museum at the corner of Royal and St. Louis Streets in the Quarter. But the slave trade was present on every block of New Orleans. This is a print from Harper's Weekly in the 1860s called A Slave Pen at New Orleans. And again, we wanted to make it very clear that the very fabric of the city of New Orleans was made up by the trade, touched every aspect of everyday life for individuals who lived there. To do the research, exhibitions don't happen overnight. And so our team put years into the research. That research even took our curator, Erin, and our photographer, Melissa, who you can see sitting at a cafe in the right-hand photo as far away as Africa. Originally, we had conceived of having another larger exhibition tracing the connections between Louisiana and Senegal. And while that aspect of the exhibition did not come to pass, I think anyone who has done research at any level knows that what you see and what you read and where you go, it sticks in your brain, it sticks in your heart. And so this particular research trip very much informed the making of Purchased Lives, which we ended up focusing just within the city of New Orleans. After the exhibition closed at our gallery, thanks to the generosity of the National Endowment for the Humanities, we got a grant, and the grant enabled us to take all of the objects to Alexandria, Louisiana, to Austin, Texas, and to Memphis, where we closed the traveling run at the National Civil Rights Museum at the Lorraine Motel. Thanks to an additional grant and support from the Louisiana Endowment from the Humanities, we were able to create, very importantly, a panel-based version of this show that allowed it to travel in the next 2 years to 10 sites, libraries, town halls, national historic parks like Magnolia Plantation near Natchitoches, Louisiana, that you see here. And this reach made all the difference in the world for raising awareness of the exhibition and its contents. That panel show has since traveled to Johns Hopkins, to Fairfax, Virginia, to Illinois, and across the state of Louisiana to other museums. Now, we're getting back to Lost Friends. I had said earlier that the exhibition was bookended by 1865, the end of the Civil War, and that's not completely true. The final section of Purchased Lives, called In Search of Freedom and Family, explored the aftermath of the trade through the testimony of those most deeply impacted by it, the formerly enslaved and their descendants. The object I have on the screen now was in Purchased Lives. It's one of those artifacts that helps tell this story. It is a stereograph view. It is called Plantation Children. It was taken shortly after the close of the war, and its publisher included it in a set of souvenir views that were titled Louisiana Scenery. One more time, Louisiana Scenery. So what do we do with that? What do we do with a narrative? And Judy referred to this earlier, the lost cause, where people are being reshaped and retold as scenery. And so we knew as we worked on our exhibition and decided what we wanted to do with it, that we needed to tell this story and take it into the present. In 2012, a scholar named Heather Andrea Williams published a book, Help Me to Find My People. And this is a remarkably humane work of scholarship that helped to raise awareness of the advertisements placed in Black newspapers in the decades after the Civil War. And so, inspired by this book, as we were developing the show in the mid-2010s, we decided that we needed to dedicate part of the exhibition to advertisements placed through a local newspaper. The Southwestern Christian Advocate was printed in New Orleans from 1877 to 1929. It was an organ of the Methodist Episcopal Church, and it included local news and national news, pastoral news, sermons, and advertisements. And the title field for these advertisements in the Advocate was Lost Friends. You see a sampling of these ads here. To place a Lost Friends advertisement in the paper, if you were a subscriber, was free. If you were not a subscriber, it cost 50 cents. These newspapers were distributed across the Southwest, Mississippi, Louisiana, Texas, Arkansas, Tennessee, to nearly 500 preachers, 800 post offices, more than 4,000 individual subscribers. And as Judy has described, advertisements and other news items were read from the pulpit. They were shared among congregants. So the impact and the reach of the newspaper was quite profound. I'll just read one very short representative ad. You've already heard some earlier. This is from 1880. A woman named Celia Rhodes writes, "Dear editor, I wish to inquire about my people. I left them in a trader's yard in Alexandria with a Mr. Franklin. They were to be sent to New Orleans. Their names were Jarvis, Moses, George, and Maria. Any information on them will be thankfully received. Address me at Aberdeen, Mississippi." At present, we have over 2,500 such ads from the Advocate in our Lost Friends database. How do you find it? Well, I will begin by saying that on the homepage for our database, we reference the Last Seen project, and we encourage any researcher to search as widely as possible. But if you're curious about Lost Friends, you can begin by Googling Lost Friends. We will be the first result that comes up on that Google screen. You can also go to our website, again, hnoc.org. Look for research and collections. You will find under research tools a set of databases. You can view the database. That will guide you to search the ads or browse the ads. You can search by name. You can search by year. You can search by location. I ran a quick search for Tucker, which is one of my family names. 12 results came up. If you have any problems using the database, you can reach out to our reference staff, and we're always available to help with research. We're very pleased that as of 2023, the Lost Friends materials are also part of wonderful new resource out of James Madison University, the compendium called Mapping the Black Digital and Public Humanities, because it's all about access, and the more access points, the better. For those researchers who might be interested in viewing some of the ads in their original context, pretty much the full run of the Advocate has recently been fully microfilmed, digitized, and is available for free through the Internet Archive. So I'm going to pause for a minute and just talk a little bit more about how the database got made, because it is a very human story and a very deliberate story. And the story of the making of Lost Friends leads directly to one of the more curious outcomes of the database. So in every issue of Southwestern Christian Advocate, you'll see one open here. This, I think, is from the early 20th century. There might be one ad, Lost Friends. There might be 3. There might be 4. There might be 6. There might be none. Members of our staff went and had to read, there's no index. These aren't, you can't press a button and find them. So we had to read page by page through each issue of the paper. We would find any Lost Friends ads that were there. We would photograph them ourselves, or often Melissa, our photographer, would take high-res photos to document them. And then we would bring them back and volunteer in Plochet. Spent the better part of 6 years doing the data entry, just methodically jotting typing into a spreadsheet names, people names of places, pertinent dates. She would double check her work, triple check her work, and then submit batches of data on spreadsheets to our tech team. Don't ask me how they took that and built the database, but they did. And so Diane Plauché is really a key person in this story. And this is where I want to take you to a little town called Ethel, Louisiana. It is just a speck on the map, about 45 minutes, an hour north of Baton Rouge. And this is where Diane did some of her data entry. This is where her husband, Andy, has family. The Lane family, and the Lane family were enslavers. And this is a part of their family history that they've become aware of. And in the past 10 to 20 years, Diane and her husband, Andy, along with their neighbors in Ethel, have traced the genealogy of both the white and the Black descendants of their family. Location, they have restored and made open the cemeteries where these families, their descendants, have been buried. And as Diane, that's her on the right, was working on the data entry, she and her husband, Andy, is to the left. She was just reading for fun a book, a paperback that she picked up by an author named Lisa Wingate. Lisa's in the center. And Dan was like, what do I have to lose? This woman writes historical fiction. And she wrote Lisa a letter, kind of an email, and she said, hey, you write historical fiction. I work for a history museum, and I'm working on a project that you might be interested in. And Lisa dropped another book that she was under contract for with Random House, and she visited Diane at her home. And after a couple of years of research, the result was a book called The Book of Lost Friends. It debuted in April of 2020. So April of 2020 wasn't a great moment. The pandemic has just hit. Not a super time to have a book tour, but Lisa made herself available through Zoom events and otherwise. And this book was on the New York Times bestseller list for several months. And at the Historic New Orleans collection, all of a sudden we started getting just waves of inquiries about the database. The book was picked up by book clubs, by Black sororities, by white churches, by readers across the country. And they responded to the stories because what Lisa Wingate did was deeply embed the story of how these advertisements were written, the human stories that they reflected, and the way in which both formal church networks and informal networks helped spread the stories of families torn apart by slavery and the hope that persisted for decades. And so we never thought that this very magical database would result in the sort of book that you can pick up in an airport book stand, but it did, and it expanded the reach of the database and the story so much further than we had ever hoped. Now for something a little bit different, because like I said, I'm a historian. I'm used to working in very, again, spreadsheets and Word documents. But I love it when the work that historians do connects with artists. And so just last year, our museum got a call from a curator in New York named Joyce Pierce. That's her on the left. And she wanted to let us know that the Lost Friends database had inspired a multimedia artist named Seda S.B. Porter, and her name, she's on the right, and that she had developed a installation for Lincoln Center of places. This installation was called Adrift, the Bayou project, and I'm going to read, if I can find it, the artist's statement about this project. The Bayou Project is described as an immersive, sonic, and augmented reality installation that transports viewers out of time through collages of written and recorded stories of separation, loss, and reunion. Using mobile devices, the artist's statement continues, paint blue door frames become portals that invite visitors to see, hear, and meditate on their own memories as they unravel the tales of families searching for reconnection. You can see here through a viewfinder what visitors to this Lincoln Center installation saw and learned. The artist, Ms. Proctor, is seeking additional grant support. She would love to travel the exhibition, perhaps to sites across the country or even abroad that have been implicated in the trade. And so, again, very much something that we were not expecting, but something that was a wonderful way to raise awareness of the Lost Friends ads and more broadly the advertisements that existed in newspapers in the decades after the end of the war. And so I want to close my presentation similar to the way that our previous speaker did, addressing this question of whether or not the advertisements worked. Were there stories of reunion? Do we know about any success stories? And, you know, much in the same vein, to an extent, there are scattered pieces of evidence that reunions did take place. On the screen here is one example of a letter to the advocate written by a gentleman named George Green in 1891, documenting that through the instrument of the advocate, he had been able to identify and reunite with family members, and scattered through the various issues that we read. Yes, we would find one here, one there, but not large numbers. One of the remarkable things about this particular story of found friends is that in 2022, descendant of George Green, Mr. Stafford Coleman in Houston, discovered the database, and through it was able to expand his own family history. And in that way, his family was found a second time. And those are the sorts of stories that certainly we treasure. Just briefly, I'll go back and give you another example of the way in which the database is working in the present day. This advertisement placed for a woman named Jenny Higgins, and one of 2,500 in our database, not one that I had read myself. It wasn't one of the ones that I digitized. But after Lisa Wingate published her novel, she got a letter from a reader, and I just want to read from it because I think it's telling and may address some of the questions that some of you may be having as I showed stories, showed photographs of Lisa and Diane and Andy. So this reader writes to Lisa, and he says, as a Black man, I had made a point over the last few years to read more people of color and more men. I've spent my life reading and appreciating the works of white women, but now that I'm 40, I've realized I need to expand. So when my book club chose this book, I was like, ugh, here we go, another book by and about white women. I found one interview, the letter continues, where you introduced the topic, and on one hand, I was intrigued, and on the other hand, I silently rolled my eyes, thinking, here we go. I'm going to hear a white woman tell me how Black people feel. But you encouraged us to check out this database, and I did. And I wept, and then I searched, and then I found my great-great-grandma. He goes on, I found this sad Jenny Higgins. This is the town that my family is from. I grew up not far from there. Jenny Higgins is my great-great-grandmother. Today I got a small fraction of my history back, and today I feel as if I met her. And so the paths are twisting, and we never know what needs to line up where to make a connection. We just know, as public historians at the Historic New Orleans Collection, that we need to do our part to make resources available. Have on the screen here ads that were referenced earlier and that I know we're going to talk about later, placed in 1885 and 1889, I believe, by Mr. Edward Taylor, very key individual in the story. So I'll just leave you with a few final thoughts. Why do we do it? Why at the Historic New Orleans Collection do we do this work? It's because the historical record is so fragile, and it depends on the good faith and the goodwill of the entire human family, because family matters, and because families are complicated. My colleague, Jerry, some of you have probably seen him in the news recently as the genealogist who was the first to identify the Pope's Creole roots in Louisiana. It was such an exciting discovery. But whether your story is in the news or it's just in your heart, we hope that you will benefit from the resources that we have to offer. Again, our website is hnoc.org. I'm Jessica, putting my email up here. I'm always happy to, any questions that you're not able to ask today, I hope you'll reach out to me, jessica.dorman@hnoc.org. And our general reference mailbox is reference@hnoc.org. With that, I will stop my screen share and throw it back to the group.
Thank you ever so much for that, Dr. Dorman. That was a wonderful presentation, very enlightening and inspiring. We now are going to begin the question and answer period for you. And I'm sure there are lots of questions. If you have a question, feel free to come off of mute. If you want to come on camera, you are welcome to do that as well. If you would prefer to place your question or comment in the chat, you can also do that as well. But yes, now is your time to interact directly with the great Dr. Dorman. Yes, Rochelle.
Good morning, everyone, and hello again, Dr. Dorman. My question to you was apparently back in, I think it was 1720, if I'm not mistaken, maybe 1820, I don't know, when the Jesuits had some enslaved Native Americans and Africans before their suppression. They had to liquidate, if you will. And I can't say Kaskashiway, I don't know if I'm saying it right, in Illinois. And according to the data at the website, it said that they took them down to New Orleans and sold them. Do you guys have any research on that particular transaction? And if so, could you speak to that, please? Thank you in advance.
Well, thank you for that question. And so I'm going to begin by saying that I hope today to be able to give direct answers as often as I can. But part of my role, because I am one of, at this point, 150 to 160 individuals employed at the collection, I will tell you in advance, I don't know about that particular documentation. And so that's why I wanted to give both the general reference number for our museum reference at hnoc.org, as well as my own. My work is in publications, so we publish books, we dig deep, and we support all of our exhibition work. But I can tell you some of the materials that we do have available in our research center and online. So we have online, as part of a database, guides to materials from both the French and Spanish colonial periods in Louisiana. These are findable through that same kind of research to research tools to databases portal. And those databases will pull up at sometimes a collection level, sometimes an item level, all of the materials in our holdings that we have, both original materials or microfilm, microfiche materials speaking to that period before New Orleans became part of the United States. And they're pretty intense. Now, some of what we make available through our portal is not unique to us. Again, this is all about access and multiple entry points. So I'm really sorry that I do not know whether that particular document from 1720 is something that we have either a facsimile of or information about in our research center. I'm so sorry, but I'm jotting it down, and I'm going to bring it back to Jari and to some of my other colleagues who have more expertise in that period when I get back.
Thank you. And I'll see if I can find the link that talks about them having what happened and them having taken them to New Orleans and being sold. I have to look for it.
I mean, I don't have to tell this to anyone on this call, but it often is, you're looking for a needle in the haystack sometimes with all of the wonderful resources that have been digitized in the past 10 to 15 years, in particular, searching and getting that correct keyword. Sometimes magically something comes up right away, but often it's a matter of finding that, whether it is through the records of the port and materials where you can find passenger lists, materials that are business records that you find itemized, and then you need to take that extra step of searching. It can be really easy when you get lucky and really less easy at other times, but again, need to reiterate that we have a full reference staff that is always looking to help researchers with their queries.
Wonderful. Thank you ever so much for that. We do have some questions in the chat. Specifically, Halima has asked, can you put your contact information in the chat, please?
Yes, I will do that. Typing now.
Oh, thank you ever so much.
Nope,
I also
still
see
typing.
that we've got a few additional questions here. So
Yeah.
Sister Regina Calloway has said, thank you, Dr. Dorman. HNOC is one of my favorite research institutions. I receive your newsletter about the paintings in the attic in Algiers. We learned the family may have come from Maryland. Is there anything more about their history or descendancy?
Hi. Sorry. And so I will flesh out this question a little bit for those of you who don't receive our newsletter. We publish a quarterly magazine that is mailed to members of our organization. I think I'm blowing it that I can't remember. I believe for $40 a year, you can be a member of the Historic New Orleans Collection and have, many special perks and invitations to special events and tours and receptions at our museum, and receive our HNOC quarterly, but you can also get all of those stories for free through our First Draft blog. And so the story referenced here is about a homeowner who purchased a property in Algiers. And when she and her husband were just doing some restoration work in that building, they discovered in the attic, in a space that had been sealed off, a set of family portraits from a family not their own, but as we learned through research, had been a family that had owned the property for over 100 years prior to this discovery. And with work, and I again need to credit my colleague Jari Anara, as well as our photography curator, Mallory Taylor, we were able to do some research and learn more about that family, discovered the several generations represented in these early photographs that have informed us about their history. And so the question says that the family may have come from Maryland. I know that Jari himself is the person who his curiosity was sparked by this discovery. I will relay this to him because he was the person actively doing the family history research. And if I hope I have a way to follow up and be in touch with you, but I will ask Jari to share the latest research that he's done on, just that magical moments, like you open the dark room in the attic and all of a sudden just a family's faces come out, and it was a remarkable find. So thank you, Sister Calloway, and I will ask Jari to follow up.
Wonderful. Let's see if we have any additional questions. So Jerome Spears states, both presentations were greatly appreciated. I am motivated to now dig even harder to continue in finding my people. Thanks again. Do we have any more questions or comments for Dr. Dorman? Okay, well, I do have a little question for you, if it is all right, regarding this particular exhibition and the database. Have you gotten a lot of feedback from individuals who say that they have made a discovery about their own ancestors from it? And what has that been like?
So yes, we have, and typically when we mount an exhibition, nothing takes more work at a museum than creating an exhibition, and almost all of ours are homegrown. They're not all strictly using materials from our collections. Again, we often seek out loans, but we build them, we write them, we design them, we install them, and that can take 40 people working for a couple of years to make an exhibition, and then the show might be up for 3 months and close, and it's a bit of a letdown when that happens. We knew from the start that Purchase Lives was something special for us. As I said, we had originally envisioned not just this exhibition centered on New Orleans as the center of the domestic trade, but also tracing roots out as to Senegal and other locations that were the point of origin for so many Louisianians today. So we knew that we needed to keep Purchase Lives alive, and we needed to grow it. During the run of the exhibition in 2015, the Lost Friends component was a relatively small component. Melissa, our photographer, had created a collage of many of the ads, and we had just a prototype of the database that we created to include in the galleries themselves. And that prototype traveled to Alexandria and Austin and to Memphis. And it traveled as well on a little kind of iPad that went with the initial traveling circle for the panel version of this show. But that was all done within a couple of years of the run of Purchased Lives. And so by that time, and I should have thought to photograph some of them for today, but we, as we often do, had a comment book open in the galleries at all of the different locations. And I can follow up and share with you just so many people talking about the way that this exhibition touched them. And those who did engage with the Lost Friends component, primarily as I'm seeing in the chat, said that it was inspiring them to continue to do personal research. But again, we wanted more, so we expanded the database that had several hundred ads at the start to the point where it is now at 2,500 ads. It's not done, and it has, as I've mentioned, connected to these other resources, to Last Seen, to James Madison's giant compendium of digital resources. We are still building it, but yes, our reading room, Heather Green, our head of reader services, continues to kind of share with our staff notices that they get. Sometimes it's just people finding clues or learning about archival resources unique to us or not unique to us that they've used to build their own family stories. So it's ongoing, and it's nothing but growing, not just because of our work, but because of all of the work and the connections that are being made worldwide this time.
Wonderful. Yes, I know that when the database was first launched, I did find an advertisement that referred to one of the slaveholders of my ancestors on my paternal side. And it provided some context for something that was mentioned in that slaveholder's will about enslaved people who had been taken further south by a relative of his. And yeah, it was just sort of magical to see these different pieces of information coming together in a way that I had not expected. And so you get this voice that you have with a will or an estate document. And then you have this voice that you have of the enslaved people who, after emancipation, are able to say something about their experience under this institution and to get a different sense of what it was like, away from just the dollars and cents that are part of the calculations that you see in other documents. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that, because and I think often about our volunteer Diane, who was doing the data entry. And so you talked about sort of the dollars and cents and the way that certain components of this story have been emphasized by historians, by others over the centuries. Judy, in her presentation, talked about what rich documents, even a very short ad might be. In one paragraph, you have so many different pieces of information. Now, there are some ads that heartbreakingly are very sparse, that might just remember the first name of a parent, even more often, maybe just remember the last name of an enslaver. But others just build brick by brick the amount of information we have. And so the job of our data entry person was to take each of those words that might possibly be sortable into a data field, names, places, dates, and to put it out there so that whatever question is in the mind of somebody using this resource or another resource, they can choose the data fields that they wish to emphasize. First names, last names, not just the money, not just that kind of macro level, but the story at its very base that returns humanity to this historical narrative. So yeah, that's what it's all about.
Absolutely. And once again, I think that this work, these particular types of advertisements, come in different forms, but overall, they are providing details that otherwise wouldn't be there. And I've encountered a number of people over the years who have indicated that they have been crucial to filling in blanks about their family history, or again, just providing the context of their ancestors' experience. And that is part of why we put this together, is to introduce individuals to a record set that is telling the stories of ancestors in their own voices, and to further promote and enhance the development of resources that will allow descendants to amplify their ancestors' voices and to ensure that these stories are told over and over and over again so that they're not forgotten. So again, I thank you for that. All right, do we have any additional questions, comments, concerns for Dr. Dorman?
All right. Well, thank you so much. I will stay on the line for the what follows, but please, anyone who's here today, don't hesitate either to reach out to me directly or to contact Historic New Orleans Collection, where all of my colleagues would love to hear from you.
All right. Once again, thank you ever so much for your excellent presentation. And we do look to hear more from you and from this wonderful collection of data, stories, and insights from the Historic New Orleans Collection. Thanks again. All right, so we are going to move on to the next presentation in our agenda for today. And this is particularly interesting because it goes back to what I just mentioned a moment ago. Descendants telling their ancestors' stories. And in particular, this connects to the presentations that we've already heard. So we have a video presentation of the descendants of James Edward Taylor, also known as Edward Taylor, whose advertisements we have already seen discussed in the two presentations that we've had thus far. So without further ado, I will present you with this enormously helpful video presentation. Thank you ever so much.
All right, well, here we are in Rosedale, Louisiana. What a momentous occasion. This is going to impact so many people. And so why don't we just start? Maybe you guys can introduce yourselves. Who are you?
Well, I'm Jean Dorsey, and these are my sisters. My oldest is Linda, my second sister Teresa, and my third sister is Eddie,
All right.
and of course I'm the youngest.
Excellent, excellent. And how do you guys relate to this GU 272?
We relate to it through our, as my mother, is Dorothy Taylor, you know, and my mother's Dorothy Taylor. Her mother was a Hawkins. Her mother was named Aretha Hawkins. So my mother's father is Charles Henry Taylor,
Okay.
yeah, which is the son of James Edward Taylor.
Ah, okay, excellent, excellent. So we have some questions that we're going to ask, and you guys can feel free. There is no right or wrong answer. You guys feel free to answer as you see it. The first question is, please tell us the story of your ancestor James Edward Taylor's search for his relatives.
But what I know of is that I think it was around 1889. He did an ad to search for his parents and his siblings. He put an ad out. According to this, it was in Louisiana, and I was told it was Mousson, Louisiana, which I've never heard of, but I don't think it really exists at this point. Maybe part of I'm not sure if it's Iberville Parish or either Point of Peace Parish, but according to what we understand, it was Mousson, Louisiana. He put an ad out looking for his parents and his siblings, which he had 3 brothers and I think 1 sister. Now, I don't have any information to say whether he actually found it or anything like that. So that was the only information that I remember of. Do you remember anything else?
I don't remember anything as far as his traveling and trying to find his family and stuff like that. However, I do have a story to tell about it.
Okay.
My mom stated that James Edwards was a blacksmith. And at his job, while he was working, of course he was a slave at that time, the master came and asked him to come and do something, wherever it was. And James says, well, as soon as I finish this, I'll come. Well, the master thought that he was being sassy or whatever, so the master took the whip and whipped it. James caught the whip, pulled the master off the horse, and whatever instrument that he had at that time, the rumor is that he killed him.
Wow.
And he ran away.
Wow.
So we couldn't find any information
We
on
couldn't
that,
find anything on that.
except that was told.
That was told by my mom and her brother Charles Taylor. Same story.
Wow.
So obviously their dad told them that.
Yeah. Now, James also, again, according to what we know, he was on the original 1838 sale, the list to be sold. But we don't know what happened, that he was not sold to Henry Johnson, which came to Louisiana. He was sold to someone else. And from what we understand, he was only 3 years old when he was sold. He was separated from his family.
Wow.
Yeah, and then he was sold again, and he was 11 years old. And I think that's when he was sold to Louisiana. So we don't have an exact date or time when in, but he was about 11 years old, according to what we understand. When he came to sold the second night he came to Louisiana.
So 3 years old, he was sold from Maryland?
Yeah, according to, but he was in Whitewash, Maryland as well. But it looks like at 3 years old they were separated. The fact the sisters and the mother was sold to someone, and then he was sold to someone. They were all supposed to be together on that 1838 sale. But according to what I understand, his name is on the list, but he did not get sold to the Henry Johnson that came to Louisiana. He was sold to someone else.
Wow.
And he was only 3 from what I'm understanding.
Amazing. The second question is, how did you learn about Mr. Taylor?
James Edwards,
Yes.
my grandfather's Bible.
Oh, wow. Can you hold that?
It had name, I think it has his name.
His birthday?
Don't have his birthday. Had James Edward Taylor and his wife is named Matilda Skipper.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
How old is that?
I have no idea. Older than I'm 74, so he's older than me.
Yeah, it's my grandfather, so it's definitely older than you. It's my grand, which is Charles Henry Taylor.
My grandfather did
My
wrote
grandfather, he wrote all of his children's names.
Wow.
and
And
they
when they were
were
born.
And when
So this was Charles Taylor, which was again the son of James
Wow.
Taylor.
It's older than that.
Well, it's gotta be older than that.
Yeah, yeah.
Maybe 100.
But it's gotta be older than that, because he got all of his children's
Oh,
names.
yeah,
Yeah,
like
they're
they're over, just about over 100.
But everybody's over 100 at this point.
Yeah.
Even my
Yeah.
mother was on, so all of our
That's right.
siblings, so that Bible's definitely well over 100.
The mother will be 100 come October.
Yeah, she's got what, 7 siblings?
Or
Ahead of her.
yes, yes.
So did you guys talk about this story, or it was just kind of passed down to you? Did you grow up talking about this story?
Actually, no.
No,
No.
we
We
didn't.
didn't know anything about it until maybe a few years ago when they kind of started with the Georgetown thing. And as I was telling my siblings, sometimes when they was talking to other individuals, I was not always here when they had some talk to some other individuals about this. And Rochelle, you know, she gave us a lot of information on this, and so that's how we learned a lot of this is from her.
Wow, wow, it's
I
amazing.
learned it from her. She called me in Virginia, 2013, 2013 or 14.
Uh-huh.
And we sit up to about 2 or 3 in the morning, just reading the whole column. We
Wow,
just shocked. We had
We know
heard,
nothing.
we didn't know nothing about it until
Wow.
we started discussing it, and she was saying how it was working its way toward Louisiana, how they were coming here. It was
wow,
interesting.
wow. So you were in Maryland,
Virginia.
in Virginia.
When I heard
Wow, and it was working its way to
Louisiana.
Louisiana. That's remarkable. That's remarkable. Was this a so the New York Times published an article in 2022 on James's advertisements seeking his relatives' whereabouts. You guys know anything about that?
We are aware of it.
What you reading about
How
it.
the ad, you know, came about, how long he had been looking for them or anything. We're not aware of that.
Okay.
But looks like from what we saw, he put in maybe several ads
Wow.
looking for his family. I don't know the exact dates or times. And a lot of this is kind of sketchy because we're trying to, you know, it was in the 1840s or something, 1880s maybe. But there's no record of any information after he placed the ad. Obviously, he could not find them
Wow.
for that. And of course, his parents, which was Moses and Eliza, they actually was in Whitewash, Maryland as well, and they ran away.
Wow.
They actually ran away. They escaped.
Yeah, they ran.
They ran away.
They escaped.
According to what we read, they ran.
Now, we don't have anything to show that the children were with them. What happened after that. And when they escaped, there's nothing listed with the children. And we don't know what happened with James either. Again, like you said, how he came about.
We don't know how James got to Louisiana, from where, we're not quite sure from where. The time span in between there. From, and we keep hearing that there's a Newsong Lane, which is in Maryland. And I don't know at that time if they did that like a little county or a little town or whatever. And I think that there had been a plantation in that area. Not sure. Just bits and pieces, you know. Can't remember a lot, but think that there may be a little plantation in that area. So we're thinking that Newsong was there. Saying it's actually Newsong Lane. Because back then, from my understanding, there was no P.O. Box, 28 P.O. Box. It was just a P.O. Box, Newsong, Maryland. P.O. Box, Newsong, Rosedale, or something like that. So
Wow.
I'm not quite sure.
Wow.
That's skeptical about that part there, too.
Now, did he have any siblings?
Yes.
What do you guys know about that?
Well, we found out about that around the same time that we found out about James. We did not know when Rochelle again gave us some information. When they gave us the information on Moses and Eliza, which was his parents, that's when we find out. Now they were sold. They're not clear about Moses either. That's how they got separated from James. Eliza and her children were sold separately from James.
Wow.
And when Eliza and Moses, whenever they did get together, they would escape. Moses, which is his father, there was an ad put out from his owner, which is named James Evans, put out a reward for the return of Moses.
Is that right?
Yes.
Yes.
Wow. How you guys feel just learning this history? Like, how does it hit you?
Oh,
Well, it's hard. It's heartbreaking to hear. You know, for me personally, and how humans are commodity, are treated as a commodity. For to pay for your a university, not personally just your farm area, but you're talking about a university for thousands of people to attend. You know, that is not the color of the person that you're using and enslaving
Wow.
to pay for that. So it's disturbing, and I mean, this is no comparison right now, but when I was just listening to the news, how farmers was running, you know, from the FBI, just I was watching, you know, it's just like a modern day slave time, you know.
Yeah.
And just watching that has nothing to do with what I was talking before.
No doubt.
But it just like it took me back when I was watching that, and I said, man, I can't imagine what our people went through back then. And this has nothing.
Nothing.
This can't even compare to
Absolutely.
back then.
Absolutely.
These people running for their lives.
Wow. Wow.
But then, on the other side, I'm glad,
It's a
not
lesson.
for the actions, the stuff that they went through, but I'm glad that we know somewhere where we got started.
yeah.
That's where the roots, where we think the roots really started at. So, because we never had no in and out. We knew mom and dad, and that was it. We didn't know our grandparents because my grandfather died by the time I was probably a couple of months old.
Yeah.
Grandmother died about the same. So we didn't know anybody. So we don't know where they come from, where they like again, I thought everybody in the family was in Paris. And now I'm finding out that we're way out in another state.
Wow.
So it's sad, but we got something.
You have to understand if you were a slave and was a runaway slave, a lot of times you didn't want people to know who you were,
That's
where
right.
you came from. Because most of the time, again, you may have an ad put out to search for you. And as we said before, that was reward for Edward, James, and so many of them changed their names. And so we don't even know about, that's why we didn't know about some of this stuff, and they didn't probably even discuss it.
Wow. Wow.
It's probably was hurting for them too.
Yeah.
It's probably hurting for them too. You know, you get up and you're lined up, you and your children and your husband gone to this plantation,
Yeah.
your wife gone to this plantation, and the kids gone there. So.
Wow.
You know that he put out an ad to look for his parents was awesome, and I don't know if he put out the ad himself or did he get somebody to do it for him, because he actually freed himself somewhere along the line, but we don't know that information as well.
Wow. Well, this has been very educational, and I'm grateful that Rochelle asked me to do this. First of all, being with you guys, hearing your story, what you know of it, how it's impacted your life, and when you learn history and you can make a connection, it's liberating. It frees you to some degree. And so thank you for allowing me to do this, and we're going to sign off. Yes, thank you.
All right. Thank you ever so much for this wonderful interview. And I do believe that a number of descendants of this family line are here with us today. And now is your time to say what you have to say. Thank you ever so much.
Thank you, and good evening. Can everyone hear us?
Yes, we can.
Okay. And so, of course, we're Dorothy Taylor's daughters, And I'm Jean. This is Teresa, Linda, and Eddie. It's 4 girls. Mhm. And so thank you for having us today. We do apologize. We've been having a little problems with our Zoom, but I think you guys can see us. Again, as we said earlier on the video, we didn't know about a lot of things about James, but I am so glad that we were able to find out, even though this may have been a tragic with Georgetown, but we were able to find out some very positive information on our relatives, so in our history. So that is great. So we do thank you guys for having us on. I did want to reiterate a little bit, or go back to James, from what I was told from my brother last night. It was the overseer, not the master, that asked him to come there, and he was doing the work. He was as a blacksmith. He didn't want to stop because he said he was informed to continue working. So the master, not the master, the overseer thought he was being disobedient. And when he came, that's when he whipped him a few times. And James pulled the whip. And according to my brother, he was actually forging, which is a part of meddling. When you do a blacksmith, he killed him with that axe. And from there, I guess that's when James ran away. And he ended up, I think, around the early 1800s in the Union War. Yeah.
Well, thank you ever so much for providing some additional context there. It's such a rich and fascinating story. And it's just so wonderful that, as you stated in the video, you were able to access it, you were able to verbalize it, you were able to preserve it for future generations.
Yes. 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 We think this is a divine issue as well, because it's amazing, because Eliza was a Dorsey that married a Taylor, and my mother is a Taylor that married a Dorsey.
How beautiful. Yes, these things do happen. And so there are a number of comments in the chat. Rochelle has provided some additional summarization and context for the video. Jerome Spears writes, priceless oral history. Love it. Rochelle mentions that cousin Dorothy Taylor Dorsey passed in 2020. Here's her sharing her thoughts on the GU student referendum, referring to the referendum at Georgetown University seeking to start a fund regarding the university's history of enslavement. And so there's a video attached there.
It's a correction. I don't think it was 2020. It was 2022, right, cousins?
Right. It was August, I think, 29th, 2022. And matter of fact, she was a few months of shy of 97. So she will be 100 this October. And we're gonna have a celebration for her.
October 15th.
We're having a hell of a celebration.
Beautiful.
Yes.
All right. And Bernice Bennett writes, wonderful. And Jerome Spears has written, I hope all 4 siblings have considered DNA testing. Your data would do wonders for ongoing family research.
Okay. Yes, we will.
Okay. And Rochelle has mentioned that cousin Dorothy did in fact do a DNA test. Okay.
Yes, she did. She did.
And so Alvin Blakes asks, are you related to Patricia Ann Taylor from Iberville Parish, who wrote the book Arriving in America about her Taylor family?
I'm not familiar with Patricia Taylor that lives in Iberville. I mean, we did have some individuals that were shipped from the boat in parts of that part of Louisiana, which is Iberville Parish, north, but that's South Iberville. We're in North Iberville. So there were some people in the Plaquemine area, maybe Donaldsonville area. So, but probably someone we related to, we just do not know.
Understood. Yes, that is the thing in this world. We have so many connections that we do not know. And we come across information as we research, as we take DNA test, that reveals some of these connections that we had never thought of. But we also come across information that complicates our understanding of what our family is or was. And so I am just so thankful once more that each of you was able to join us and discuss this wonderful history. I see that Rochelle has raised her hand, and I'm sure she has something to contribute.
I just wanted to say thank you to my Dorsey, Taylor, Hawkins cousins. There is another piece of the history. Their grandfather, Charles Taylor, who was the son of James Edward Taylor, actually married Dorita Teresina Hawkins. And Aunt Doretha was actually the daughter of Jackson Hawkins, 3-year-old Jackson Hawkins that had been brought down to the South. So we have this history of connecting to all these babies, if you will, that were just transported. And earlier when we came on, I did share my grandbaby is in town. She's 3 now, and I can't help but every time she looks at me and touch me, I'm just flowing with tears right now because I can't get that out of my spirit right now. But I wanted to touch on the piece regarding the Bible. I was talking to a cousin yesterday in Louisiana about Bibles and so forth. And here's something that I want everybody else across the country to know and understand. The sad part of Bibles and those type of papers being in these homes is that with the rain and the flooding and the humidity and the mildew, these documents are actually being, my cousin was telling me that they actually had to throw one away, that they couldn't read it and they hadn't digitized it, Shannon. That's where I was getting with that. Anybody who got anything, please let this generation know. Please do not throw stuff away. Please do not throw stuff away because we need to do the best we can, even if it is mildewed or whatever. Take a picture of it. We all have cell phones now. Do something, but don't this stuff is gold and we need to treat it as such. So I just wanted to put that out there because what our Dorsey cousins provided for us, we could not find evidence of how James Edward became James Edward. We don't know how that happened, but clearly that's who he was because that's what he wrote down. However, on the 1838 agreement, he's listed as Edward Taylor. And so we need that type of evidence when we talk about him and prove whether he added that to his name or not. That's who he say he was, and that's what we gonna call him. So I just wanted to make that clear.
And Ro, one other thing, Charles Henry Taylor, which is my grandfather, had a son as well. His name was James, but his middle name was not Edward. I think his middle name was Abraham, but his was named James Abraham Taylor.
Wonderful. This is all fantastic information. And it should remind everyone here right now how important it is to transmit this information to the next generation and remind them of how important this information is. Because there are many lessons to be learned from our ancestors. You know, there's often a saying that comes to mind. Make your own mistakes. And from our ancestors, we should learn what mistakes not to repeat. We should also learn what lessons we should pass down to the next generation, what things we should continue to replicate from generation to generation. We also need to remind everyone how important it is to preserve this history, living in the time in which we are now living. Today is a very important day, not simply because we are having this virtual Juneteenth celebration, but because it is also the anniversary of the US military, which I think is lost on some people. And what was sort of glossed over during today's conversation, I think, is that James Edward was also a veteran. He was a member of the US colored troops. And so when we talk about him freeing himself, he did that in more ways than one. His self-emancipation did not begin and end with his running away. His self-emancipation, his self-definition also came with his decision to enlist in the US colored troops and continue the process of emancipating many more people just like himself. So I just wanted to remind everyone of that on this day of all days. Thank you ever so much. Any more questions?
Thank you.
Oh, you are more than welcome. Pleasure is truly mine or ours to share. But I do want to give anyone else in the audience the opportunity to ask any more questions directly or provide any additional commentary. Fred, Sybil, do you have a comment or a question?
Yes, I do, as a matter of fact. We talk about the records that we have, paper records and things in the Bible and those kinds of things. But my family recorded all of our family information as each person was born. Either my mother or my oldest sister recorded that on, and you may not be familiar with this, you young people, but there was a Schiffer robe. Does everybody know what a Schiffer robe is?
Yes, we do.
Yes, of course.
But this was a piece of furniture that had a full door on one side and some drawers on the other, the mirror on the outside, but on the inside there was a piece of wood that they wrote down every person that was in the family, when they were born, the time they were born, everything. This was essentially our Bible. And I just felt like it was something that was so valuable to me. That was the only thing that I wanted from my parents, was that Schiffer robe. But that disappeared, as did everything else. So I'm cautioning people and reminding people that you may have things that provide you with history that you don't even know what the value of it is right now. But we should take the opportunity to talk about what we have and what it means to us. Now that we know that we have a history, that we can We can share visual evidence that we were a family and we were together. And so I'm definitely part of the Hawkins line. Um, uh, my three greats grandfather was little. Um, Jackson Hawkins, who was 3 when he was brought from Maryland to Maringouin, Louisiana. So of course we're still trying to uh, identify all of those pieces that nobody knows. One of the main things is to talk to the older people in your family who may have information that you don't have. And when you see it, you don't know what it means. But that is one of the problems that I see, is that the communication is not as openly shared as it should be at this point. Because we're trying to recreate a whole history, and everybody has a piece of the story. And don't let your senior members of your family get away from you with that information. They've got it. You just have to sit and speak with them. So I thank you. This was absolutely a wonderful experience for me. These are my cousins, um, the Dorsey girls. So it's good to see you guys. And actually Rochelle is my sister. So that's another piece that some people may not be aware of. But I just want to say thank you to Shannon, who continues to do a wonderful job in trying to give us our history. So thank you, Shannon, for that. And this has been another exercise that has provided a lot of information for us. So continue, and blessings.
Thank you so much, Sybil, for your kind words and for your pearls of wisdom. We must continue to, as you have already stated, consult our elders and collect all of these pieces of history and assemble them into something that is comprehensive and has the depth that is required of such an undertaking. Thank you again. And I noticed that in the chat, a very interesting comment was placed by Carol Gibson. We come from strong, resourceful, intelligent stock. How James and so many others self-emancipated is a testament to all our ancestors, enslaved and free. And I think that is just such a fantastic comment to summarize this discussion. Does anyone else have anything else to say about this particular moment in history?
Shannon, it's Teresa. I posted in the chat. Do you want me to read it?
Yes, Teresa, you are free to read your comment.
Okay. Well, I still have a voice. I wanted to say thank you to everybody. All the presentations were awesome. I'm absorbing all this info as I am finally breaking into my 5 colonial Virginia lines that have like challenged me. But recently I've been dealing with the fact that I've been studying the maritime industry up and down the East Coast because I'm first Africans as well as Indigenous up and down the East Coast. So we've had major breakthroughs, but we connect to in Greater Virginia, Maryland, West Virginia, to the Taylor Davis Woods, Paulette, Burris Burgess, all different names, Harris Dickerson, Thomas Jackson, Barber, and more lines. And it's very clear that our folks were sold south. We have clusters in North Carolina, in Alabama, Mississippi, etc. And I recently may have found, using genetic genealogy, my unknown 3 times great grandmother. And this is a sad story given all the close matches we have to the Elizabeth Burris family. It looks like I descend from an unknown daughter of Giles Barber, who is said to have been Nigerian and was imported as a medicine man and worked on the plantations. And his descendants, one daughter, Elizabeth, had, I think it was 5 children that we know of by an enslaver with the last name Estes, James Alexander Estes, who eventually migrated to Kentucky, Tennessee, etc. And he sold all of his mulatto kids, who happened to have like the same names as his white kids. So we know, going on this and on just where the clusters are in relation to the white enslaver families, that I have a lot more work to do, but there is a tremendous tie to all these planters from Virginia. We have a huge cluster of people who came out of Eastern Shore, Maryland, um, in the St. Mary's County, and the ties of the maritime trade up and down the East Coast. Again, you think your roots are in the South, but when you start going back on these enslaver lines, you sort of find out that they came from, one brother could gone from England to Massachusetts. Some of these people are Plymouth um, plantation folks. They ended up, another brother ended up in Virginia. Then they go back to Princeton University, and then they come back. So there's all this movement up and down the coast that's tied not only to maritime trade, but also to enslavement. So yeah, I'm trying to find my people, and I'm excited about this search. And that's all I had to say. It's been a wonderful morning so far.
Thank you, Teresa, ever so much for, again, contextualizing the history and providing us with a more extensive continuum of migration to and from and within what we now call the United States. And again, we want to thank the Dorsey sisters for taking the time to share this beautiful story with us. And we want to, again, thank all of our speakers thus far for providing us with so much rich information. And on that note, we will now transition into the question and answer period for Dr. Giesberg, who has just rejoined us. So again, thank you ever so much for this fantastic narrative. We will begin the question and answer session with Dr. Giesberg now.
Okay, Mr. Shannon, Mr. Christmas, I do apologize for that. One moment, please. We just wanted to say again, thank you all for having us on. Please keep us, abreast of what's going on, and we're hoping to get our DNA and so forth. But we do have to leave because we have a couple of Juneteenth celebrations. Actually, we were planning on attending. So again, we want to thank you for having us, and we would definitely be keeping in touch.
Absolutely. You have a super Saturday. And again, we are ever so grateful for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Same to you.
Bye. All right, Dr. Giesberg, thank you for rejoining us. Anyone who has questions or comments, please feel free to come forward or forever hold your peace.
want to confirm too that I can come back and listen to it's all going to be posted somewhere, so I can come back and listen to the pieces that I didn't get a chance to hear. Oh, very good. Okay. I'm very happy to hear that. I'm sorry that I had a couple things I had to go do in the last hour. So I'm happy to come back and listen to the stories I missed. I'm happy to be back here with you all.
Right. Well, yes, we are just, again, so honored that you have the time to spend with us today. And I do think that there should be a number of individuals who have questions or comments regarding your wonderful presentation. And so for the audience, feel free to come on camera and to turn on your microphone if you have questions or comments, or just simply wish to engage with Dr. Giesberg regarding her presentation today.
Or anything else. If anybody has gone to the site and found somebody or has questions about the way it works or suggestions for how we can make it work better for people who are doing their searches, I'll put the website into the chat if anybody wants to take a look at it and look around.
Right. Yes. Thank you ever so much for that. I do have, I suppose it is a question or perhaps a comment. I did really like the different tags that you have in the database that categorize the various advertisements so that you can see certain themes running through the advertisements. And thank you for sharing your screen so that everyone can see what I'm talking about.
I'm so glad that you mentioned the tags because I think they really are useful, to approach the archive in a variety of ways. If you're going in to look for an ancestor, right, you can search by name and location. We have a map there on the front page that I can show you too. But the tags are also are quite useful, I have found, right, to searching in a for themes, as you said, right, that run through the collection.
Right.
Yeah, like like one of the ones that we have found has been of interest as of late when we've been talking to different groups of genealogists and students is this tag female enslaver, because I think there has been a misconception or misunderstanding about sort of white women's participation in the slave trade. And that is a gross misrepresentation that white women were not involved in, in buying and selling of people. And so we began tagging years ago, ads that name women who were, who bought and sold people. And so when you click on that tag, you get 300 different advertisements that name a female enslaver. And then all of the military tags are, I think, particularly on a day like today, when we're thinking about the history of the United States military, there are 4 different tags, I think more than that, but there's U.S. Army, there's U.S. Colored Cavalry, U.S. Colored Infantry, just sort of, U.S. Colored Troops as more of an umbrella term, U.S. Navy. So, if you know that you're looking for somebody who's was enlisted, but you're not necessarily sure of the other information, you can click on that tag for the U.S. Colored Troops and get many advertisements taken out by Black veterans and widows as well, I should say. The widows are also, I think, also would be tagged U.S. Colored Troops. So in the aftermath of the Civil War, when widows are, oh my goodness, let me see what's happening here. I'm trying to turn things off and instead there we go. Yeah, so you can use those tags, to enhance a search. Yeah, and then I'm sorry, I'll just keep talking, but we can stop and I would also just encourage people also who have not been to the site before, to look also at the mapped and, the maps that are available to people who, whose ancestors were scattered by these repeated sales. So you might not necessarily have a lot of confidence in names that you have, or you might have some questions about names you have, but you can search by location, right? So you can go, right, for instance, right, you can go to Maryland, right, where you were just talking about, Eastern Shore of Maryland, and you can zero in on different locations and then click on one of these locations and see all the different advertisements of people who either hailed from that place or were searching for loved ones from that place. So, right, there's Maryland, and then we could do the same thing for New Orleans. And as you can imagine, there's a lot of activity, right, because of course of its significance in the to the slave trade. So the ads will pop up, and you can again, you can do searches that way as well. So there's lots of different ways to discover, to use the site to find information that, that can be of use to you. And I think I also mentioned earlier, and I'm very sorry that the audio was, that I could not get the audio to work, but if you're interested in hearing, professional voice actors from Sirius XM radio read some of these advertisements, you can do so right on the site. So here are all of those recordings, so you can actually experience having had these read aloud to you in a Black church in the aftermath of the war. You can do that by listening to these recordings here. And then you can also, if you hold on, this is what I'm looking for. We have on the site here a variety of people who have written to us and shared their experience of having found somebody on through the ads. These are success stories. So folks who are who come to the site and find somebody in their family and want to share that story with us. We feature some of those stories here. So if anybody listening today would like to share their story, we are always happy to hear it. You can also just simply go to the site where the page where you found, the ad, and you can post it there, where each of the ads allows you the pay. It's an interactive website, so you can, when you find an ad that is of interest to you, or to whom, for somebody who you're related to, you can simply just click on the ad and add your own story to it. And we have a lot of that activity going on the site. So when people are doing searches, you'll notice people are posting and saying, this is my great, 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 great grandmother. Or also, telling us, as I suggested during my presentation, telling us the rest of the story that we don't have, because the ads really only tell us when people are starting their search for their family.
Wonderful. Yes,
Oh,
thank
there's
you.
story. I'm sorry. There are questions in the chat. I'm so sorry. I was sharing. I didn't see that. I'm sorry, Mr. Christmas. There are some stories in the. There are some questions in the chat. Did we want to address those? Or
Yes, absolutely.
okay.
So Iris Grant has stated, thank you for your work. I have been able to find at least 2 people in my family who placed
Oh my
ads
goodness.
in Texas. Thank you for
Oh
that.
my goodness. And then we have a friend thank you, Iris. I am thrilled to hear that. And please know, Ms. Grant, that if you can, if you want to go to the page where you found found the person to whom you're related, and oh, there you are. Hi, Iris. I see you now.
Hi.
Things are moving around, so you just popped up on the front. I'm delighted to hear that you found a person. If you ever like to share that, we'd be thrilled to hear that.
Oh, definitely. Do you
Who
want
did you
his name?
Oh, that would be lovely. And I can, we can go to the site right now and look if you want to. We can
Okay.
go to the ad if you want to.
Sure. His name is Granville Webster Norman.
And that's how you found him on the site?
I believe so.
Okay, well, let's try it. See if it works.
No.
I probably have too many names. It's sometimes if you have too many names, it doesn't like that.
Maybe take out
So-
Webster.
Yeah, I was going to say maybe two words, two names. Let's see if we can. There are four. There
Here.
actually they look like there are several that are also nested. There are several from one person. Iris, do any of these people look like your person?
He was in Austin, Texas.
Okay. We have
And
somebody. Oh, go ahead.
I have the
Yeah, here's one right here
Oh,
in
okay.
Austin.
Found-
Reverend Granville Norman searching for his sister Martha. There are three ads from this person, and they're
Yeah.
and this person's from Austin, Texas. Granville is from Austin, Texas, and this is your ancestor.
He is actually married to one of my cousins. Let me see what it says. He's the father-in-law of my first cousin 3 times removed.
Amazing.
Yes, and his descendants I've shared this with them. They are living in Los Angeles currently. So they went from Texas to Los Angeles.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. So, if when you're on the site and you find somebody, to whom you're related, there's a button up here where people go and share information. So, right. So if they wanted to, or if you wanted to, you could add anything here that about Granville or any of his descendants here. It's interesting because it looks like like I said, he has several different ads.
Mm-hmm.
That I don't know why it's not working now for some reason. I can't go back, but he has three. There are three of them there looking for his sister, I think, and other people. But yeah, this is hopefully even more useful in some ways when people take out several different ads. We will put them on the site if they provide different information. We won't post the same ad if it's identical. So that means these three ads likely have the information that they include in them varies. So that would mean that maybe he's naming more people, or he's added another layer of detail to his advertisements. Thank you for sharing that.
Really, really exciting. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Oh, sorry, I'm going back to the chat now. I'm moving slow here. And then thank you, Iris. And then from Alvin, I have a friend from Mineola, Texas. Have not read your book. Can you share some of the findings about the story from Mineola? Is Alvin still here? Or did I miss Alvin? Because I was too slow to respond.
Yes, I'm here. I'm here.
Oh, hi, Alvin. So I am thrilled to know that you have a friend from Mineola. The Andersons in Mineola place a number of advertisements from that town, and it's a very small town in the late 19th century when they're placing these advertisements, and it's in close proximity to a number of railroad junctures, so it likely explains why we've got this, from this teeny little town, we have so many people placing advertisements looking for their families, and from this remote corner of East Texas, they're looking for people in Virginia and Maryland and many different places. And there's one young man named Sandy Anderson who must work for Black newspapers, several Black newspapers, because he is placing advertisements in multiple newspapers from this small town. And one of the things that's fascinating about Mineola is that a lot of people are actually finding people, which seems so unusual, so unexpected that, in this very remote place in East Texas, which is hard to get to today. People are finding people because they place follow-up ads saying that they found their loved ones. So, Alvin, if your friend is descendant from anybody who might have, wound up in Mineola, Texas, I would definitely encourage him to go to the archive, to go to the website and search for Mineola, because you'd be surprised how many people got their stories of slavery and freedom into the papers.
Thank you. So it's a she, and the
She,
chapter
sorry.
in your book, does it talk about it talks about the Andersons, or does it talk about, because I haven't seen the book yet, so does it talk about their arrival in Mineola, that type of
Yes.
thing? Okay.
Yes, it talks about their arrival there. The Andersons were sold, I'm pretty sure from Maryland, if I'm remembering correctly. I have to go back and confirm that. And they wind up in, I believe they're traded, or at least one of them. There are different branches of this family. Some of the family gets traded through New Orleans, and then they wind up in Mineola. And that's where they are freed.
And her family name
and
was Clark. So I'll have to look at the chapter and see what else is there that she was
yeah,
able to use. Yeah.
yeah, I would encourage her to do that. The chapter does talk about Mineola. It talks about sort of what it would have been like to be a freed person. Again, what it means, and each chapter allows us to sort of think about what it meant to look for your family from different places. So, what is it like to look for family back on the East Coast from a place like Mineola, Texas? So it thinks about that kind, it walks us through the institutions that people built there and how those institutions supported these searches for family.
So was there a particular reason why you chose this Anderson, or was it just a good story, or why'd you choose that one to write?
So the Andersons were interesting because there were all of these different ads from different family members,
Okay.
that showed up in this in the collection. Again, from a very small place, there are 5 different members of the Anderson family looking for their family members. And then there's this one Sandy, who is the niece and nephew of Henry Anderson, who we saw his ad earlier in my presentation. He's related to them, so it allows us to sort of think of this next generation of young people who were, who came free as young people, and how they were very much a part of the search. So he's helping his mother and his father and his aunt and his uncle search for their family members, but he's also helping other people in Mineola look for their family members. And he, as I suggested to you too, he seems to have been an agent for these newspapers. So it allows us to think about a lot of things, not only the sort of assistance of a family member, but also the way newspapers were, the way that Black newspapers operated to help people search for each other.
Okay, very good. I will relay this information to her. Thank you.
Thank you, Alvin.
Yes, and I do see that Rochelle has raised her hand.
Hi,
Hey,
Judy.
Rochelle.
It's me again. I was
Hi, Rochelle.
just hi. I was just wanting to connect the dot or close the circle, I guess. I put the New York Times article in there regarding what was it, Taiwu and her family. And I forgot to
Yes.
bring this up. While my Rosedale Doyces were on the line. I did mention it to them. I want everybody on the call to know that that article and that family, cousin Dorothy Dorsey, who the young ladies, the cousins you saw, their mom was the youngest girl. The oldest girl name was Isabella and Isabel. Taiwu comes from that line, and they don't know each other. Taiwu did not. It's because of the generation thing and them migrating out to California, to the Bay Area. The girls are aware of, Aunt Isabella and the stories, and but Taiwu she didn't really know about the line. So I just wanted to make that full circle and let people know that you did have. And I'm curious, how did you how did they become a part of that article with you? That's my question.
Thank you, Rochelle. I'm glad that you closed that circle because I left that open as I left. So I believe that they I learned about that story, their family story, from Rachel Swarns, I believe, when she contacted. It's been a few years now. I believe that it was I was contacted by Ms. Swarns while she was writing the article. So I don't know if they had already found the Edward's advertisements at this point. But I believe that's what's precipitated it, is that the family was searching and they found the collection and found the advertisements. And then Ms. Swarns contacted me. But the first I had heard about it was when Rachel Swarns was writing this New York Times piece. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
All right.
All right, thank you ever so much for that. I do have a question regarding something that was relayed in your book regarding the differences in the advertisements between what was published in African American newspapers and to some extent what was published in mainstream newspapers, or what some have called white newspapers, and the romanticization of the experience of being enslaved, the experience of the Civil War, the experience of being emancipated. Has there been any sort of study that attempts to, for lack of a better term, quantify that juncture, that separation in the narratives that are presented in African American newspapers and mainstream newspapers during that time?
Thank you for that question. I am not aware of any attempt to sort of, quantify, the phenomenon that occurs in white newspapers versus what happens in Black newspapers. I know that when, we first started this project and our intention was to find, we thought we would find maybe 1,000 advertisements, and we were only looking in Black newspapers. And so we had no intention of ever looking in a white newspaper because we had no idea what we were getting ourselves into. We thought we'd find 100 maybe. And then when we started to talk about this with Black genealogy groups here in the Philadelphia area, we began to learn that we had grossly underestimated the size of this, phenomenon, or how big this phenomenon was, because Black genealogists were telling us that yes, they were in a lot of newspapers, and we needed to keep looking. That we didn't, that at 1,000 we were really just getting started. So we started to look broadly, and then when the website went up and we began to get people involved, or people began to contact us, that's when people began to send us ads that they found in the white newspapers, because we said, we were recruiting people to transcribe the advertisements, but people also got excited and started looking in newspapers.com, which we do not use, and started to look for other advertisements. And they began to send us these white newspapers stories. And at first, our conversation was centered on whether or not these were the same thing, whether we were looking at the same kind of source and whether it had the same purpose, and also whether we should post them at all, because as you just so aptly described, these are very highly romanticized articles. They don't seem to be necessarily, they're not providing a lot of information, and it doesn't necessarily seem clear to us whether or not the information is actionable. If you just provide a first name of somebody, are you really giving us, some romanticize these two people get married again, whether or not this was intended to help us search. So we had a conversation about this, several conversations, whether or not we post them. And then we decided we would, because we couldn't dismiss the possibility that we're really talking about real people. So we posted them, and then we tagged them. Back to our conversation about tags, we decided we would tag them white newspaper because we wanted to make sure that people understood that we were not entirely clear again what their intentions were, but because they were very different, of a very different tone, that we would want, that we would want people to understand that they're different. And so, we have almost 5,000 advertisements in the collection, and a small subset of those are white newspapers. That's likely, that likely doesn't, I don't know if that is representative, or if that is part of the way to answering your question. But I don't know of anybody who's tried we certainly haven't tried, in an ambitious way to find white newspaper stories at all. They have come to us through a variety of different ways. Sometimes people are searching for instance, there's, chapter 5 of my book is about a woman named Diana Johnson, who winds up in Goliad, Texas. Not all the stories are in Texas, but she's Goliad, Texas. And she placed advertisements in all the Black newspapers you could find and a bunch of white newspapers. And so I went searching for her, and I found advertisements in white newspapers and added those there. In fact, Diana Johnson actually placed so many advertisements. She placed an advertisement in a Polish language newspaper in Chicago, which again, I would have never thought to look there, except I was looking for Diana Johnson. And then I found all these other places where she placed an ad. So it's a very long way to tell you that I don't know the answer to that question, but hopefully it's enough context to give people a sense.
Oh, well, thank you ever so much, because, that response just begets so many other questions, in the sense that I'm shocked, if I understood correctly, to hear that you don't utilize newspapers.com for the database. Oh, wow.
No, because we want this to be free, right? So the database is free of charge. And if we use newspapers.com, that's proprietary, and because genealogists, as many of it, and as many people in this call know, right, we're always paying money to Ancestry and to newspapers.com and Fold3 and Genealogy Bank. And when we started this project, we were committed to making this information free and keeping it that way. So when we find these advertisements, we find it the OG way by looking at microfilm. Or in some cases, these are being digitized by university libraries or state libraries, and then we can find it, like the historical, New Orleans collection has digitized a lot of the Southwest Christian Advocate. We actually went to the microfilm to find the Southwest Christian Advocate because before we knew that the historical New Orleans collection had them. But so our ads are harvested old school by reading the microfilm. But that's the way we can keep them free.
Oh, that is very good to know. Well, that's a detail that I'm sure each of us can appreciate. The other matter that jumped out at me was that you have a tag for some of these advertisements that reads white father. And so to me, coming from it from the perspective of a genetic genealogist, and I sort of saw that as an opportunity for a project where you could build family trees based on these advertisements, public family trees that would help some of these individuals who are testing to understand where this DNA is coming from, who these matches are that they were not expecting. Because over the years, I've heard many times how people are surprised by a cluster of DNA matches that comes from a family that they had never heard of. And these advertisements provide a window for them to understand exactly where those matches are coming from, where that DNA was inherited from, and to understand their family in a way that perhaps was not attainable previously. So I was just curious whether anyone had already pursued any sort of project along those lines?
It's a good point. I don't know, but it does seem to have a lot of potential. Yeah, yeah, and I find it yeah, and there's so many ways to read different advertisements. I was talking about Hagar Outlaw earlier, who's in chapter 2 of the book, and she is a mother of 8 children who are all sold away from her by her enslaver, and as you read her advertisement, all of her children, she retains the name of her enslaver, David Outlaw, who's a elected congressman in the state of North Carolina, and all of her children still have his name, and she has his name, and there's a way in which the sort of the way in which you read the ad and try to figure out who's I have a lot of respect for trained genealogists who can look at an ad like hers and begin to sort of parse together what the relationship is between, or what the potential relationships are between the various people named in the advertisement. So I guess that's a long way of saying that I suspect there's a lot of other there are other advertisements that we have not tagged white father that likely have some of those, who have something like that kind of implicitly, that information implicit in the advertisement as well.
Right. Well, thank you ever so much for that. And if anyone else has any questions or comments, concerns, insights, feel free to come forward in the next few minutes before we transition into our next session of the day. And also be aware that Dr. Giesberg has provided her email address in the chat in case you have questions or comments that you wish to send her directly later. All right. Anyone else?
Shannon.
Yes. Hello, Renata. How are you today?
Hi, I'm fine. Glad I could join in late after our OGS meeting this morning. And I can't raise my hand because I'm driving. But I did wonder, as the speaker referred to the section for white newspapers, and I'm quoting, was there any consideration of using a different term, like perhaps mainstream newspapers there, or a particular reason behind the decision to go with white for that category?
I thank you for that question. So I think it's been a few years, so I'm trying to go back to, we had several conversations about this, as I suggested, about whether or not we even include them at all. And if I'm remembering correctly, the decision ultimately was based on on the to underscore the fact that the material that was being published in these newspapers was about the experience of slavery and the aftermath of slavery, was clearly intended not as a way of serving or helping the descendants of slavery. It was really, and if you read these stories, you get the sense that what they're intended to do is their entertainment. They're really not sort of meaningful stories that are giving information or trying to really help these people find one another. So the fact that they're intended as that seem to be intended for entertainment, that they're not seriously committed to even giving people their full names. It seemed to us that the audience for these was intended to be a white audience. And so I think that's why we decided ultimately to tag them white newspapers, and the others are not tagged at all, because, as you know, when you read the site, it tells you there are almost 300 Black newspapers in the collection, and then there is this small subset of newspapers that clearly intended to reach a wide audience, and that's how we decided to use that terminology.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it wasn't, it's not being asked as a criticism. It just brought to mind, I have very few family stories, but I do have one about a formerly enslaved ancestor who was my third great grandfather's brother, who was literate. He was a preacher, a minister. And apparently he used to, this was in Warren County, North Carolina, in a town called Littleton. He used to read the daily paper. I can't remember if it was the Warren Record or a different paper, but it was what we would think of as a white paper. And people used to come and hear him read it every morning. He would read it to, other Blacks who were not literate. And so I just kind of envisioned him reading that mainstream paper, but it being labeled a white paper. So that's kind of what made me ask the question, but I completely understand. Thank you for your response.
That's a great, thank you. That's a great story. Yeah. Yeah. And the in the advertisements that were published in Black newspapers often have these codas at the bottom that say, ministers, please read this to your congregations. And they were clearly intended to be read aloud and shared aloud, read, by oneself and, in one's home, but also to sort of that sort of, community reading of and passing along of this information is a hallmark of the way these Black newspapers handle these advertisements. So. And I love some of the, and I'm sorry, I know I have a million answers for all of these questions. So, but I love some of these advertisements that say in here, I learned to read I'm 55 years old and I learned to read and now I am placing this advertisement. So I think the connections between literacy and newspaper reading are very strong. And they run through these ads that we have, and Renata, like you said, and I'm quite sure that if one is searching for one's family members, one is going to read everything possible, or follow every piece of information wherever it's coming from. If it's coming from, a newspaper published by a Black church, or if it's coming from, the New York Globe, or wherever it's coming from.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you for your questions. I do see that Coach Carlene has raised her hand.
Hello. Thank you for the wonderful session today and information in celebration of Juneteenth, especially during this time of the energy we're faced. I have not considered this resource, and I will use it as a tool as I continue to research more about my family. I am connected to the GU 272 group and still unfolding ways and how we're all connected. Thanks to Rochelle's outstanding work. We're continuing to learn, but today I wanted to share with the group an event that's being held in Virginia tomorrow. It was a story featured on 60 Minutes about a family that lived near a plantation where their family members were enslaved, and then the family member came back and purchased. So I just wanted to share that we don't always know how we're connected, but I think every remnant completes the story of our lives. And this is a personal journey that I have. I did it for personal reasons, but I'm now understanding that it is so much bigger than the small adventure I went on searching for things. So I just want to thank you and thank those that are contributing to unfold our story as people of color, not just African Americans, but people of color. In many ways, we share from the diaspora. Thank you.
Thank you ever so much for your wonderful words and for your post in the chat and giving us all something to think about. And I want us all to once again thank Dr. Giesberg for her wonderful presentation and providing us with such amazing insights from her research on what is sure to be an inspiring conversation and inspired conversation for many, many years to come. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you all for letting me join today. Thank you very much.
Pleasure is all mine. Once again, thank you so much. We will now transition into our presentation from Mr. Christopher Smothers regarding digital preservation, among other things. And so I will give the floor over to Mr. Smothers at this time and ask that everyone place themselves on mute and take themselves off camera to reduce any unnecessary noise or unnecessary distractions overall. Thank you ever so much. And look for the syllabus in the chat.
Good afternoon. Good morning to those who are in Central Time and Pacific Time. It's a real pleasure to be here today, and I'm excited to be presenting on the bridge between access, equity, and historical truth. And so this presentation is going to cover several different aspects of genealogy, um, FOIA access, what it means to petition records out of the government and state agencies, and how this can be impactful for your own personal genealogical research. So first, I just want to take this moment to pause and recognize each person that sacrificed during the period of our country where so many millions were put into bondage. And so, you know, I feel like this goes without saying, but Juneteenth marks a significant day because it represents freedom delayed but not denied. And so, emancipation, as we know, reached enslaved people in Texas in 1866, really, 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. And that day really reflects a broader truth, and that is freedom without documentation is fragile. And rights can be denied when history is erased or inaccessible. And so archives are the ways that we, as private citizens and leaders in our communities, can re-engage the historical narrative and begin to witness who gets recorded and who is forgotten in our archives. And essentially, because archives are the custodians of proof, the archives shape what and who is remembered. And so to erase the record is to erase the people. And to recover that record is to resurrect the story and with it the dignity that was denied. And so records are truly the foundation of everything I do as a historical researcher, historical scientist, historical justice advocate. And it's really at the foundation of all the different organizations that I'm involved with. So I'm going to introduce you to Reclaim the Records. Reclaim the Records was founded in 2018, and the leader of the organization, Brooke Gaines, is truly a visionary, and she assembled a fine group of people who were really relentlessly pursuing truth. And not only are they historical truth tellers, but there's a diverse array of people on this team that have backgrounds in software engineering and information library services and sciences and professional genealogy. So, Reclaim the Records is a FOIA advocacy group, truly, in our peers forum, and we are a collection of different types of people. So you have your genealogists, your historians, and then your open government advocates. And so what we do is we go through, and I'll talk about the survey and whatnot, but we go through different record collections and state archives and look at what is most desired by other researchers alike. And we advocate that those things be put into the public domain. Many of those things we started out with is in government custodianship. So you have your Department of Health agencies, and you have your um, private agencies like the Social Security Administration and things like that. And so what we do is we go in and we FOIA those records, and I'll talk about what FOIA is. We go in and FOIA those records out of those agencies so that they're no longer behind paywalls where people um, are sort of bureaucratically denied because either they don't have all the correct information when requesting a record, or the index is inconsistent with what's actually on the record sometimes. And so the the efforts that we recently have done will be covered in the remaining slides. So here's our board of directors. From left to right, you have Brooke Gaines, the founder, and then John Dice, Barbara Matthews, Jason Gersh, Alec Ferretti, and myself. And so we meet regularly to discuss how to develop initiatives that support people's research efforts. And we are fully supported by viewers like you who are also passionate about increasing and expanding record access to the general public. And so we are so grateful for every donation and every investment into this organization, because without you all, we would not be able to fund and support the attorneys that and the lobbyists that we now have in writing legislation and arguing before the Supreme Court and things like that in order to really convince leadership, political leadership, to basically give us back our records. And so this is a really personal subject that really touches on so many of our individual research interests and pursuits. And so I'm going to discuss the FOIA, which is the Freedom of Information Act. And so FOIA is only for federal agencies. So those federal agencies include your FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the CIA, the State Department, your Justice Departments, and then Department of Veteran Affairs, and all those things alike. And so the Freedom of Information Act, I kind of, relate it to how action is required in order to petition these records out of those agencies. Action is, you know, the the energy that keeps these agencies held accountable. And so, from its origin, the Freedom of Information Act was first signed into law in 1966, and has been amended several times. And when President Obama was in office in 2016, he and other politicians and attorneys revised the Freedom of Information Act to basically increase record access and just change I guess, the spirit of those really just wanting to pursue truth and information through records access. And so the um, the the process and language of the legal documentation shifted to something that really private citizens could engage in, and was designed to be a lot more accessible than it was previously before. And so, in our activism, most recently, Reclaim the Records board member Alec Ferretti, who's also the APG, or the Association of Professional Genealogists, went before the New York State Legislature to really argue and defend um, the right to basically access these records, and not in a way that would jeopardize or breach any type of confidential information. We really just want the historic records that should in most other states are already public. And so this is the type of work that we do to um, publish and the request in public correspondence with the agencies. And in this type of exercise, Alec was able to basically convince the legislature that New York State's FOIA policies were antiquated. And as a result, after a 4-year long FOIA battle, because it's a state agency, um, so it's freedom of information um, law, um, basically concluded on May 25th, 2025. So we recently just won via a unanimous ruling from the New York Court of Appeals access to the entire death index. And so the death index and indices really include all the information that you would see on the death record except the death record itself. So it will include the name, the ages, the race, and then the certificate number and things like that. Some indices include more information than others, but with that indice, which in this case includes over 10 million records, there is ample opportunity for people to go and actually know what's inside their database. So when they do request a record, they can get to the record that they're looking for. And so the next steps in this is, determining which extra data, like the birthplace of parents, spouse, and the causes of death, are on the actual indices or not. And so we have not physically received the records yet. Since it's so recent, we have not received those records on microfiche or on a digital database. Some of them, the more recent ones have been were never put on to microfilm. So um, we know that it's a lot of records, but in regards to what format they're in, that's something we're still kind of playing by ear and don't really know what to expect. But we do know that it's over 10 million records based off of what the New York State Department of Health has provided us in this litigation process. And so um, what does this mean for you all? So this guarantees a comprehensive, free, downloadable, searchable death index that will be put on the Internet Archive, which is where most of our records go on to. And after they sit on Internet Archive, many times Brooke and some of the other individuals on our software team go in and create a website and searchable database that connect people to those records without having to look at the microfilm rolls that we receive. And so um, this is just one example of how our activism is impacting the way people conduct research in real time. And then the whole reason I was really asked to join this organization was through my activism effort with the Mississippi Death Certificate Index, which was only accessible at the state archives in Mississippi. But they charged you, for basic searches, and the State Department still charges $17 for a single death certificate. And so I was personally, experiencing some frustration because I was requesting death certificates with information that I knew was correct, but I was getting basically rejected letters saying that they didn't find the record I was looking for. And so there was no published digital version of the Mississippi State Death Index. The only record or copy of the index that existed was at the state archives, and I wasn't local in Jackson, and so I said, well, this should be in an online capacity or at least digitized. And so the WPA actually were responsible for going through all of the death indexes and creating a death index for the state of Mississippi. Prior to that, they did not have one. And so the Mississippi State Death Index is the first ever public release of statewide death index for Mississippi. And it includes all your county records, which is pretty tremendous. And then this was the first example, at least for Reclaim, that published data from statewide death indexes. And so now it's available on Family Search for free. And so what you see in that image right there is basically the search engine on Family Search, where you can type in a name instead of, again, going to the Internet Archive and looking through microfilm. And we even went through and edited those images because some of them were poor quality just in how they transfer from the microfilm to the digital capacity. And we edited them so the OCR could go in and read those names. And all of the names are typewritten onto those film or onto the pages. So when it was transferred to film, it's pretty legible. It's just the quality and condition of that film sort of deteriorated when it went through the copying process, but most of the images are completely intact. And so overall, this unlocked 30 years of death data from an era crucial for tracing family histories, right before World War One all the way into World War Two. And so this is really critical for people of color because we know that majority of people in Mississippi come from, well, I would just say this, they have a higher poverty rate and other socioeconomic factors that really are emblematic of underrepresented and disenfranchised communities. And so just being able to have a database that gives and expands record access for people who truly may not have been exposed to the power of their own agency within the vital record complex. This is game changing because it's connecting them to a past in a way that other records previously had not done before. And so we did something very similar in Missouri with the birth index. And the our this is the whole story behind this is kind of crazy. We sent out birth record requests and were denied. And then we requested the whole thing from 1920 to 2015, and they sent us a bill for 1.5 million. And so effectively, they ignored their own public records law, which forced our legal action. So we got an attorney, and after 5 years, we fought them. Um, about 5 years, we fought them in court in order to get the release of the statewide birth index from 1920 to 2015. And we even won the attorney fees. And so it was just a tremendous victory. The custodian of records in Missouri was really a stickler in trying to really keep these records behind a paywall and continue to kind of gouge people for requesting these records and a large volume of these records, inundating their staff. But what a lot of these agencies don't understand is that when you release these records to the, at least the indexes to the public, then the public can more efficiently search for the records that they're looking for. And so when they do, request those records, they know what's on the record. At least they know what file number it's under so that they can get to the right record, and then people can save money and time. And so this really is important for people of color because it enables access to ward of state era births, which includes underdocumented Black and rural communities. And so this is really kind of reinforcing the power of legal advocacy in overcoming institutional resistance and high cost roadblocks, and again disenfranchising communities that are already kind of underserved. And so this particular case set a national precedent for releasing modern vital records via FOIL lawsuits to empower researchers and families. And this is extremely impactful because now at this point, we started to really gain momentum with just establishing that, we were serious about holding agencies accountable for creating wider record accessibility, because these are public agencies, and these public agencies serve the public and are in um, they are they are derelict of their duty if they don't um, create a process in which these records can be equitably retrieved. And we continue to do this work And one of the collections I want to highlight today in particular is the Maryland records. And so we recently won over 5 million records spanning from the 18th century to the 21st centuries. Births, marriages, deaths, and naturalization. So no longer do you have to call the state archives and be charged $25 for a certified copy of a death record, um, or $5 for a uncertified copy. So now you can, um, excuse me, now you can use the database that we have created to search over 5 million digitized records spanning the 18th and 21st centuries, which include birth, death, marriage, and naturalization records. And so I've included that the births start in 1875 on upwards, and then the statewide births 1898 on upward, and then the marriages start in 1914 and come forward, and then the death starts in 1898, and then the naturalization start as far back in 1796. So this is a huge, huge, huge collection, especially for those who are trying to really find more documentation about how to prove their connection to the period of Jesuit missionaries enslaving Africans, so and African descendant people. One moment, please. So with that information, this is a huge treasure trove of documents that hold so many genealogical receipts for historical evidence and building our cases for so many different things. And in addition to this, we even recently were able to get the Social Security applications released, and that application transcript is now available on Ancestry.com, and the um, SSA FOIA process is something that, in order to get the original SS5 form, you still have to go on the FOIA um, website with the Social Security Administration and request it. However, now you actually can provide them with the information for your ancestor's Social Security number and the other information that corresponds to the original SS5 record. And most recently, I mean, we've been busy, you all, if you couldn't tell. And most recently, sometime in between, I want to say March and May, we designed a website after our victory with the Burroughs database. If you don't know what Burroughs is the Beneficiary Identification Records Locator subsystem. And so what this means is that it's 18 million, more than 18 million um, records on deceased U.S. veterans who access VA benefits. So from your GI Bill to disability, life insurance, loans. This includes service members from historic units like the Women Army Corps, Army Air Corps, the NOAA, and the Philippine Scouts during World War II. This even includes USCT pension files that are still being held within the custodianship of the Department of Veteran Affairs. And so this is extremely major because previously, there was not a simple process to FOIA those records out of the VA, but now using this site that we built, you can actually request the military records, C files, out of the Department of the VA. What happens is you can use our searchable database with all the boroughs and then find those individual veterans in those systems. And what it will do is once you fill out your address and all the information in that form, it'll fax that form directly to the Department of the VA. And they will send you a confirmation in the mail saying that they received it within like 2 to 3 weeks. And then within a month or two, just depending on their backlog, they will scan and digitize the military records and send it to you on a CD drive. And so you can go to your local library. I know many of us don't have CD drives anymore in our computers, but you can go to your local library or buy a CD drive reader, and then you can download that and upload it to your Google Drive or whatever OneDrive or cloud you currently use to store information. And so this is just another huge win for reclaiming the general public who were wanting to learn more about their ancestors' military contributions and get more detailed information about their ancestor service. I've even seen VA cards and pictures and photographs of their VA card inside these files, depending on how recent it is. And so this is a wonderful tool that taps into 95% of post-Civil War veterans files who remain in VA storage and were previously inaccessible to public researchers. So a huge genealogical and historical data resource for anyone, no matter if you're a researcher or just a private citizen. And so what does equity and erasure look like in digitization? Okay, so when we think about historical gatekeeping, this is critical information like those vital records and pensions and military records that we just looked at. And, this is in its purest form, basically keeping information from the public, locking records behind paywalls, agency restrictions, and poor digitization policies. And so this impacts everyone, not just people of color, but everyone, but especially people of color. Why? Because we are the most affected due to histories and historical displacement and name changes and slavery and genocide, quite frankly. And so the costs of archival erasure restrict our awareness and make our ancestral lines almost invisible when we don't have the recorded proof. And so erasure isn't just about access, it's about where our families lived, how they existed, and whose lives are documented and remembered in these records. And so incomplete archives hinder those reparations, those citizenship claims, community truth telling, and even medical and genetic histories. And then equity in records access means that we should move into a system that allows records to be accessible for free and creates a policy around universal access and shapes the culture and identity around one that restores rights to private citizens who are trying to access their ancestors' records. It also means designing archives and databases in a way that restores humanity and centers people back into the space that um, um, were most harmed by archival silences and governmental decisions that impacted disenfranchised communities. And so it also means that we, as a collective, need to be conscious about how we deal with in our struggles and our relationships with archives and government agencies. And so, digitization without exploitation and metadata holds those stories about the quality of how records are preserved and who and what type of communities are preserving our history. And so the culture of advocacy and access today is constantly evolving. And now we're moving into a era and generation where we can use FOIA and state laws to unlock these records, which have been wrongly withheld from the public. And we want to not just affect state and federal agencies, we even want to inspire institutions that are private, that don't necessarily have to share their records with the public, but institutions that were founded to support the mission of humanity, and as a result have created record-keeping processes that document life events like spiritual institutions in their sacramental records, who which holds so much about the commitment to spirituality and religious practice in America, and are emblematic of the type of freedoms um, that we wrote in our original Constitution to promise, those types of freedoms and the ability to worship freely. And I believe that those records are also a part of this conversation because they help us affirm our spirituality and our connections to our ancestors in that way. And so we want to make this data free, searchable, and reusable, especially for descendants of the enslaved, displaced, and marginalized peoples. And so as I said earlier, we're really calling for a new era of public memory where history is not just hoarded but shared. And so that's the end of my presentation. Thank you so much. And I suppose we'll open it up for Q&A.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that wonderful presentation. And the floor is now open for questions, comments, insights. Feel free to turn on your microphones, raise your hands, post in the chat, and turn off your cameras if you so wish. And I see that Karen Kay has raised her hand.
Yeah, Christopher, were you aware that MyHeritage had gone out to reclaim the record site and digitize, or rather AI'd, an index onto their site and also have attached the images for the records?
I believe we are, yes.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure if you were aware of that.
Yeah, I mean, Ancestry has done similar things too. We have a hate-love relationship with some of these companies because, they don't always um we see my heritage in this photo, um, with our shirt on and things like that. And we believe that they're committed to that, a similar mission. But, we believe as long as the records are getting out there and are, available for free somewhere, we're okay with, to an extent, these records being on those sites. However, it's kind of incredulous and contradictory to put the records that we work so hard to make free back behind a paywall.
Right. Okay. Just
Yeah,
wanted to ask. I was just asking. Thank you.
no problem.
And I just wanted to add to that, specifically referring to the Maryland vital records that you mentioned in your presentation. They are now available for free on
Correct.
Internet Archive.
Correct.
However, they are also available on MyHeritage in a way that is a little different than they are available on Internet Archive. And so when we talk about what we are paying for and what we want to have be free, in that particular case, the documents are indeed free someplace. What you are paying for at MyHeritage is the ability to just type in a name and a place and have that record show up in a way that's not quite possible yet on Internet Archive. Just to provide an example of the tension there that you mentioned.
You're correct.
Okay. Any more questions?
I have a question.
Yes, feel free.
So, Christopher, this is Alvin Blake. So I have a question for you.
Sure.
Talk about your efforts to make records free or affordable to people versus somewhere like the state of Mississippi, which uh, may claim or is claiming that they need the revenue from records, not just Mississippi, but any state. How does
Sure.
that work in terms of, does that mean revenue has to come out from there and there's revenue they won't get to keep their facilities open? Talk about the balance between that and what all that really means in terms of affordable records.
Yeah, I mean, balance is certainly the key word. So in the case of Mississippi Records, we actually purchased those records using the donations we received from from our donors. And so they were available, and I personally negotiated a price with the chief archival custodian of the Mississippi State Archives. And after we had negotiated that price, I and Brooke, um, you know, made basically purchase those records and put them on the Internet Archive. But the main argument they were using was they didn't want to deter tourism. However, not having access to records is deterring tourism to places without people understanding their connections to them. It's not going to create any form of meaningful connection If they just have an assumption that they're related to a general area, it's a whole nother thing to have access to a specific record that gives them insight into specifically what community their ancestors or the people that they're researching were a part of and involved in. And so any state that local tourism that says that opening access to records deters tourism is truly it's just false. And so when we allow the public to understand how their ancestors were involved in these spaces, they have a more intimate understanding and awareness that should drive them to want to go into the courthouses or into the other repositories surrounding their ancestors' connections to that history and that historical legacy.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, and for those who are not aware, Maryland was in a sort of similar situation in the sense that if you wanted to access those vital records that we mentioned earlier, you had to travel to the state archives. And though the records were already digitized, you could only view them in something called a search room, where they had computers where you could see the records there, but you could not access those records from home. And so for many researchers, it was a slap in the face that they were being forced to have to travel in order to access the records. In the case of Mississippi, there are many people who simply, for lack of a better term, do not feel safe traveling to certain locations because of the history of racial violence in Mississippi. So I think those sorts of things need to be communicated for you to sort of put this message in context, if that is all right.
Absolutely, I agree.
Any more questions, comments, concerns? All right. Well, I have a few questions or comment regarding this matter. So I know that Internet Archive has faced some struggles in recent months, in part because of the reliance on people to sort of fact check what's going on with the digital spaces that belong to the federal government. How have those challenges been discussed or thought about amongst members of the Reclaim the Records team?
Honestly, we have not truly been discussing those challenges with Internet Archive, just because we have really begun to, I guess this is in direct response to it. We've kind of pivoted into not relying on Internet Archive and just creating our own site and database to store all the information that we get. Internet Archive I mean, it's truly a great resource, but it was the beginning of where we decided to store this information. We felt like it was one of the most publicly known spaces where this volume of information could be held, but now we're and have been transferring to websites that we have made organically, like the Burroughs database here and the Missouri Birth Index. We designed these together, and we've transitioned from kind of over reliance on Internet Archive. So we haven't necessarily gotten into a deep conversation around some of those challenges that Internet Archives have experienced. We've kind of just begun creating our own framework where those records can live independently.
Wonderful, thank you. All right, any more questions? Speak now or forever hold your peace.
So Christopher, this is Alan again. I have one final question.
Okay.
In terms of the um, Civil War pension files,
Yes.
I'm speaking specifically of the XC pension files that are in
Mhm.
St. Louis. Can you speak to that? Is that just a VA situation where the VA files are not complete or whatever, or is that actually part of your project in terms of uncovering those files in the various places in St. Louis? I'm just curious about that.
So are you asking under what circumstances do the VA hold XC pension files instead of them being held at St. Louis?
That's kind of my question. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So the VA holds, let's just back up. So the Department of the VA holds several military pension and compensation files. So compensation files, IEC files, because these records were created and maintained as a part of the federal benefits process for veterans that I'm sure you're aware of. So in the cases where the VA is still holding some of those XC pension files, is because after 1935, those files were still being kind of paid out to descendants of those veterans. And so many of these files still remain with the VA for decades after a veteran's death because they include updates about like their surviving dependents and other things needed for like retroactive reviews, or it may have been needed like within the past 40 years, 40, 50 years. And so what you'll see is that the archives in St. Louis will send something to California and then they'll send it to the VA, or the the VA will have held these things um, for a number of years because not only are they kind of in a retroactive review, some of them it's the sensitive like medical and financial information. So just certain privacy and federal records management laws kind of determine how they're handled more restrictively than standard military service records. Um, but in reality, like only a small percentage have been transferred to the National Personnel Military Records Center, even though like the VA works with them directly to kind of identify the site because there's so many different host sites where XC pension files can live. But the NPRC is really like the main central station where that communicates with all these other host satellite bases where those records are. And one of them I know is in like Washington State, and there's some other ones in Kentucky, like rural Kentucky, just kind of archival spaces, just kind of hold these records. But these records are still subject to FOIA. So regardless of where they are, you can use sites like Burroughs to FOIL them out. So
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
All right. Any additional questions? All right. Well, I have another question.
Okay.
What is the best way for someone to contact Reclaim the Records to join forces, to advocate for the digitization and publication of a specific record set, just like you did with Missouri and Mississippi and Maryland, for instance? There are, say, for instance, records in Louisiana that are under lock and key. And I think I mentioned this in the chat regarding the e-clerk situation, where if you want constant access to records at repositories in Louisiana for Iberville Parish, for instance, you're expected to pay $800 per year just for access to records from that parish. That might be something that collectively as a community, we might want to push back on. So what is the best way to get something started along those lines?
You really raise a an excellent point, specifically with Louisiana and just the nature of their records is especially it's especially frustrating for people like us who kind of run into those situations where we're challenged by those paywalls and restricted poorly access. And it's truly because um, of the legislation in Louisiana that currently um, is kind of written in a way that's like we're protecting history. So therefore, we're putting this behind a paywall and we want to protect these records in the history because we don't want it to be stolen and things like that. But I'm gonna this is a multi like faceted question. So I'm gonna first break down the first question, which was how do we best like contact reclaim the records and like elevate awareness around specific record collections. So there's really two ways. You can go to this tab on this page called Record Survey. And you can see the survey of our records and then the records request, sorry, where you can specifically outline the records that you believe um, and collectively believe deserve to be put at the forefront of these conversations. And what we do is we go through and we have meetings about, okay, which ones we have to look at each state's, FOIA like laws. So then we have to go through and say, okay, which one of these are um, most which record request has more of a case than the other, even if it's challenging. Like New York was fighting us tooth and nail for half a decade over some of over their statewide death index. And so it's not always easy, but it can be done. And what I would do is, in regards to if it's like a more layered situation, you can always send us an email at info@reclaimtherecords.org. And so I would just recommend like just keep the email clear, focused, and specific. And so you can use the record um, request page to identify like which parish you're referring to, the type of record it is, and why they're important and like who's being excluded, so that when we go through our kind of like bureaucratic review process, we can kind of weigh those challenges and couple them because we get so many different types of record requests. And we have funding, but it's not unlimited, so we have to kind of be mindful about which record collections we go after. And so the prime, issue with Louisiana is just that there's some real like stringent laws about even capturing photos in the courthouse. I mean, I feel like many of us know just from our experience researching Louisiana records, they don't allow you to take photos of the documents. You have to like photo scan them and then print them out. And then I think for many of the parish, it's like $1 per page. And so that can quickly add up. But there have been other pursuits to try and, you know, document that history digitally. I know that Family Search has taken a lot of like in the 60s, went to a lot of these courthouses and scanned books. And so if you absolutely cannot afford, the subscriptions because they are costly, I would use Family Search's database. If you go to a FHL library or Family History Library, you can see a lot of these images of the books that they have in their inventories for Louisiana parishes. That's generally my first go-to. And then if you are looking for a record that's not on a Family Search, then you might want to consider using the eClerk. But yeah, I think that Louisiana itself needs an advocacy group just because of how long and how many different government regimes have governed Louisiana. I think Louisiana needs its own advocacy group, but we are more than willing to support those advocacy efforts. And use whatever power we have to help push that bill and that charge. But it's Louisiana has designed their system to kind of monopolize records, and that that culture is just very segregated, and very capitalistic. And so I I don't I know a lot about Louisiana records and access, but I still feel like I'm studying on a regular basis about how to sort of break down that system because it is so um it's just antiquated the way that it's designed.
Understood. Thank you ever so much for the very comprehensive answer. And of course, I have similar questions regarding access to Catholic Church records for, you
Absolutely.
know, the 20th century, for instance. Uh, we have many individuals who are descended from Jesuit enslaved families who are not able to get archival records of their ancestors' baptisms and marriages, and
Right,
instead are paying to get these sort of cutesy ceremonial printouts,
right,
uh, which is not what they need for genealogical research.
right.
And so that's another process which I think probably falls outside of the scope of Reclaim the Records, as the focus is very much on public records, hence the FOIA and FOIL request situations. But that is another situation where we need the community to come together and take collective action to get access to the ancestral stories.
Absolutely. And it's in the private institutions that really hold power to legitimize history, especially when we're thinking about religious institutions and denominations of Christianity in America. I've worked a lot with the Presbyterian Church to help identify contemporary living descendants that were held in bondage by Presbyterian missionaries as well. And in those cases, the Presbyterian Society has digitized a lot of their like church minutes and whatnot, but I haven't seen personally a lot of their baptismal records digitized at all. And so this is, I feel, um, going to be in the conversations for the next at least 20-25 years, just because we are expanding what it means to truly own the American experience and own our experience as human beings as we engage with religious institutions that seek and rely on the support of the parishioners in order to function as an organization.
Absolutely. Uh, Thank you for that. I think going forward, it's very important that we continue to build alliances with as many organizations and individuals as possible to pursue this common goal of not only digitizing records, but also making those records publicly accessible and pushing back on the privacy extremism that is the impetus for all of these laws, keeping people from their history in order to, quote, save history, end quote. And I will stop editorializing there. Does anyone else have any questions, comments, or concerns at this time? Going once, going twice, or forever hold your peace. All right. Well, Christopher, thank you ever so much for your enlightening presentation. I hope that many members of the audience leave today inspired to take action, because action is very much needed. Thank you again. All right. So it appears that we are now winding down into our final session of the day, or should I say, our send-off, our missive, our reminder of our mission. One of our descendants has put together a poetic message for us to conclude today's conversation. We thank you all for joining us, and our poetic message will begin momentarily. Thank you ever so much. We hope that you've had a great time and that you have a super Saturday and a wonderful weekend. Please hold.
Juneteenth. Juneteenth marks a celebratory day for many, including those who have passed on before us. For centuries, our people have been enslaved, labeled as property, as well as forced to sit on the back of the bus. Our freedom was declared, decreed, and documented in 1865. Yet, so many have tried to prevent our dream from coming alive. 160 years later, we can celebrate our special day. After all this time, we finally have our say. I can hear Dr. Martin Luther King utter, "My death was not in vain. God has heard our cries, and now he's easing our pain." I imagine Malcolm X demanding recompense, proclaiming that Allah has come to our defense. I can hear the voices of those who experience senseless deaths, thanking us for remembering their names. Singing in unison, our Savior reigns. I envision Harriet Tubman praying, "Dear God, they finally have let your people go," while Nelson Mandela shouts, "Bloodshed shall be no more." I imagine the cries of my great-great-grandpa, Basil Butler, thanking the Most High for allowing our generation to play a part in this event, while the first Black mayor of Georgia, Maynard Jackson, smiles as he echoes, "God's chosen people were never built to quit." How elated I know our first Black president, Barack Obama, must be, and the cheers of our former president, Vice President Kamala Harris, singing "Sweet Land of Liberty." Juneteenth is just the beginning of what's to come. Our fight has not ended. It has just begun. Juneteenth. Thank you.
And we want to thank our Danica, also known as Bayou, for that wonderful poetic send-off. And again, we thank you so much for joining us. This concludes today's Juneteenth celebration. May you continue to have a fantastic rest of the summer. And we do hope that you spend time with your families and share the knowledge and the experience that you've had with them today. So once again, thank you so much, Danica, for giving us your words of wisdom. And we do look forward to meeting once again. Good day, everyone.